Hello, everyone. I am Giulio Prisco, and I'd like to welcome you to the December 2022 Terasem Colloquium. I'll start with a little introduction first. Just to remind you that today, December 13, is the 50th anniversary of the last day human astronauts have been on the moon. So yes, it's kind of a sad day. We haven't been to the moon for 50 years, but things are beginning to appear a little bit better now that we are going back. We have all seen the spectacular Artemis 1 mission of NASA. This is just one of the nice pictures that the robotic spacecraft has sent back. This is a especially nice one. You can see the spacecraft, the moon, and the Earth. This is a close-up of the moon surface, and we hope to see much more spectacular pictures when Artemis 2 brings new astronauts around the moon, and especially when Artemis 3 brings new astronauts to the surface of the moon. You know, things will advance. Now it's beginning to look like things are advancing in a positive way. I am optimistic, but I'm not really that optimistic. I'm not being unreasonably optimistic because there will be problems, there will be setbacks. I don't really think people will be walking on the moon in 2025. A few years later, I guess things will not be as fast as we hope. But so I myself don't have unreasonable expectations. I just want to see this Artemis base camp, the first human outpost of the moon, permanent and sustainable. I just want to see this before logging off. I want to see the Artemis base camp before logging off. But let me show you what is my favorite picture of the year. This is not taken from the moon. Well, of course, Mars would not appear that big if the picture were taken from lunar orbit. This was taken by an astronomer and photographer here on Earth. His name is Andrew McCarthy. You can buy a spectacular high-resolution version of this picture. To me, this picture really represents our future in space. Because, and I think it's the new Earthrise. It has been taken from the Earth. We can see the moon, which is the next human habitat in space. And behind the moon, we can see Mars, which is the next one. So whenever I look at this image, in fact, I had both a high-resolution print. Whenever I look at this image, I feel very optimistic about the future. All these things are going to come. We are going to the moon. Then we are moving forward to Mars. And then we will not be there to see it, of course, but then we will move forward to the stars. And that's a beautiful thought. And this is what we are going, I mean, this is the real thing that we are going to discuss in today's meeting. And I repeat, today is the 50th anniversary of the last day astronauts have been on the moon. And let's hope not having to, between brackets, celebrate the 60th anniversary. Let's hope we get to the moon in this decade. The speakers today will be Michèle Hanlon, President of National Space Society, Giuseppe Reibaldi, President of Moon Village Association, Marlène Michèle Losier, who is a specialist in space law, Adriano Autino, founder, co-founder and former president of Space Renaissance International, we will have Keith Henson, who I believe has joined a couple of minutes ago. And we will end with Frank White, the man who introduced the term overview effect that we are all familiar with. And having said that, I wish to thank you very much for listening to this introduction. And I'd like to give the floor to Michèle. Michèle, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start by just saying how thrilled I am to be here. Just moving things around. I mean, this day is just incredible to think about 50 years ago where we were and where we're going now. As you said, Giulio, I'm so honored to be able to talk about this particular time in history, because we really are on this amazing, amazing threshold. Just for those of you who don't know me, I'm the co-director of the Center for Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi. We are really focused, unlike any other school in the universe, if I may, on what it's going to look like to see humans actively working and visiting and living in space. And so while we are very supportive of the commercial industry and looking to help evolve regulations that will support commercial industry, our main focus is really on, okay, what's it really going to be like when we have a constant population beyond just sort of government astronauts on the moon, and in space, and how we need to, what we can do today to assure that those humans living in space live in harmony and peace, and hopefully some of that harmony and peace comes back to Earth. I'm also the co-founder and president of For All Moonkind, which is the only organization in the world focusing on protecting human heritage in outer space. And I'm delighted to see so many friends on this call, including, of course, Dr. Losier, who is, we're so thrilled to have her as our heritage specialist at For All Moonkind. And she's just been doing incredible work in terms of laying the groundwork to actually protect our history in space. And as noted, I'm also the president of the National Space Society. It's 9:00 a.m. here in central US, and I should be able to talk properly, but apparently the coffee hasn't completely kicked in yet. So the National Space Society is also an organization focused on getting humans building communities in space. And I'm very honored to be the president of that. So of course we started thinking about Apollo 17, and I just love these pictures of Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt, and thinking about what it must have been like to be there. And of course we want to see the humans that were there as well, because it's really important to think about, these achievements were made by normal people like you and me. Okay, maybe a little bit above average, but honestly, these are humans just like us. And I loved this quote from Gene Cernan when he said, "I sat on God's porch for 3 days of my life." And whatever your religion is, whatever your spirituality is, that I think is really moving, because he talked about his time on the moon, looking back at Earth as sort of realizing and getting this different perspective on life and what life really is and what life really looks like. And I know Frank's going to talk a lot about that, how it changes you to really look back down. But I want to, what fascinates me is what will it be like when we have more than 2 people on the moon at once, or more than 7 people on station, or on the Chinese space station? How is that going to change humanity, and how is that going to change our perception of humanity? And this isn't exactly the last thing Gene Cernan said, but he did say this as he was ending their final EVA, and thinking about the legacy of Apollo. And when we think about Apollo, we think about so much courage and persistence and this race and this accomplishment. But I really liked the way he said, the door is now cracked, but that promise of that future lies in the young people, not just in America, but the young people all over the world learning to live and learning to work together. And the key for me is the door is now cracked. That door has been ajar for 50 years. It's time for us to just slam it open, right? Let's get out there. Thank goodness we had the successful Artemis 1 mission, because it is time. And I don't think the world can wait much longer. So I always like to start my talks and discussions making everybody realize, everybody on this call today, everyone who's listening in, everyone who's going to watch this later, everyone has a role in the evolution of space and space law and human activities in space. And the decisions that are made today will have far-reaching implications for the future. Remember that a lot of what has driven space exploration has been driven by individuals who made a decision. President Eisenhower said, you know what, I'm going to create a civil space agency because I don't want space to be about military uses only. John Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon. In our lifetime here, we have Etienne in Luxembourg saying, I want Luxembourg to be a spacefaring nation. We individuals have this ability to make change, and we really need to take advantage of that with respect to space. So when I think about space, I've spent, December has been a really fascinating month for me because I've been pulled in directions that I've never really thought about before. I should say November and December. So this past weekend, I spent at an offsite with a bunch of neurologists talking about bioethics and the ability to experiment on humans to go to space and whether they should be treated differently than humans on Earth. But what really fascinated me was a conversation that started back in actually in October. I had the honor of being at the Beyond Earth Symposium, and one of the showrunners for The Expanse zoomed in to talk to us about the show. And if you haven't seen The Expanse, it's awesome. The books are even better, but we have different pockets of humanity in space, right? We have the Belters, we have the Mars people, we have the Earth people, and they gravitated towards these tribes. And I asked the showrunner, I said, so you have this concept of humans in space still having that tribalism, that need to sort of pocket themselves with people like themselves. I said, do you see how that could be any different? What can we do to change that? Because we don't want different pockets of humanity. We want one unified humanity. And the showrunner said, this is the vision from the book. And when we look at the vision, we don't see anything different. He said it is in humanity's DNA to be tribalist. And I thought that was just really sad because as long as we're tribalist, we're going to be in conflict with each other, right? And whether we take our sovereign identities with us to space or not, if we can't get beyond this concept of tribalism, how are we going to survive? Of course, now space is a lot bigger. And I love this concept that I think about is once we have a community on Mars, it's not going to be so hard to think about a community on Europa or beyond. So in a way, we have to think about this expanse and expanding humanity. And maybe we can be tribalists and just go to our different corners of the universe. But even that, I think, is sad to me. So when I think about how can we fight this tribalism and pursue a conflict-free, or at least manage conflict in a way that we can be working together for an outcome for all of humanity and the human species, I'm going to look at international law first. And so we have, as I think most people who are on this call will know, we have 5 main treaties. The Moon Agreement is ratified by only 18 nations, so don't call it a failed treaty. It's a treaty that only has 18 parties that are bound by it. The other 4 treaties have much more buy-in. And of course, the Outer Space Treaty is our Magna Carta of space. I'm going to talk about the Outer Space Treaty only because I think those are the principles that are guiding us and that will have the most effect on my mission to sort of at least ameliorate the bonds of this need for tribalism. So very briefly, because I know there's a lot of amazing speakers coming, We have the Outer Space Treaty with it's very short, exploration and use of space carried out for the benefit of all humankind. Exploration and use is the province of all humankind. Outer space is not subject to national appropriation. So put your flags away, put them up for models, put them up just to look pretty, but you cannot claim territory in space. Activities are carried out in accordance with international law. It is not a lawless Wild West frontier. We have the peace provision, no nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction anywhere in space, and the moon and other celestial bodies must be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. We have international responsibility of national governments for non-governmental space activities. So this is really important, because one of the things that people always ask me is, why is space different? Why do you want space to be so different? Space is different from the high seas. Space is different from Antarctica because we have this very interesting provision of sovereign responsibility for the acts of nationals, whether they are acting for the government or not. And that, how does that affect us? We don't know yet, but that's a very different concept than what we work and live under here on Earth. We have liability provisions and jurisdiction provisions. So those are the operative provisions of the Outer Space Treaty. But what I find really interesting, what I want us to embrace as we look to the next 50, hopefully much, much more active years of space exploration, are all the times we talk about international collaboration in the Outer Space Treaty. International cooperation and collaboration is mentioned 7 times. That's a lot in a very short treaty. In the preamble, we talk about the contributing to international cooperation in the scientific and the legal aspects of exploration. We believe that cooperation contribute to strengthening friendly relations between states and between people. So we see, even back in 1967, when the Outer Space Treaty was ratified, this understanding that, okay, we need to fight against this tribalism. But it's not just the preamble. International cooperation is mentioned 5 times in the Outer Space Treaty, 5 times. There is this real desire, all the way back from the 50s when we were in a Cold War. There's this desire for humans to work together, to collaborate, to cooperate. We will facilitate and encourage international cooperation in the scientific investigation of outer space. We're going to carry on all activities in the interest of promoting international cooperation and understanding. States parties will be guided by the principle of cooperation and mutual assistance. We are going to promote international cooperation and in terms of when somebody wants to see or observe the flight of our space objects. And we're going to agree to tell the United Nations what we're doing in order to promote that international cooperation. And on top of all that, Article 5 of the Outer Space Treaty says that astronauts are envoys of all humankind. We don't have a provision like that anywhere on Earth. People who go to Antarctica, tourists who go to Antarctica, aren't envoys of all humankind to the South Pole. Right? Now, there is some argument from a legal standpoint. The Outer Space Treaty says astronauts. The Return and Rescue Agreement says space flight personnel of spacecraft. The Federal Aviation Administration here in the US says space flight participants. But the concept is, if we're sending humans into space, they are the envoys of all humankind. They are not the envoys of the United States. They are not even the envoys of the Artemis Accords. They represent all of us. And that's something really important to think about. It's something I think we really need to sink our teeth into as we, as the individuals on this call, as our organizations, think about how we are going to defeat tribalism, or at least make sure that even if we are collected in our different groups, however we identify ourselves when we're in space, that we have the tools to manage conflicts peacefully. Finally, the Outer Space Treaty has this due regard provision, and I called my presentation, due regard for space, because due regard is really, I think, the foundation of how we are going to build the framework we want to see. Again, we don't want to lay down rules and codes of conduct. We want a framework to allow our future selves to be able to relate to each other peacefully and manage conflict responsibly. And so Article 9 says that we will conduct all our activities in outer space with due regard to the corresponding interests of all others. Now I put this this visual in because, you know, what does due regard mean? To non-lawyers, due regard is very commonsensical, right? It means be responsible, be considerate, you know, respect other people's operations, and dare I say property, even though we can't have property in space at this point, we are going to have to recognize some sort of property interests. And so I put that out there. But of course, lawyers don't like simplicity, right? And so I call the due regard provision the cha-ching provision, because look at this. This is how we define due regard. It's a balancing test between the parties of the first part and the rights of the parties of the second part, and what were they doing and how are we going to look at it, and whose rights are more important and who had more to do and who could have avoided the conflict, so forth and so on. We can argue due regard. As a lawyer, I could argue due regard and keep appealing for decades. We don't want to spend money arguing. We want to spend that money investing in space exploration. And it's a waste of time for us to argue. We need to think about moving beyond, about understanding what due regard means. And so to me, the baseline for our future really requires us understanding and putting guardrails around this concept of due regard and giving us some certainty. So we're not fighting all the time about what due regard means, but we're understanding that due regard requires responsibility and consideration. And so back to Apollo 17, look at this. All of these things are still there on the moon, right? There's no weather on the moon. So these things are protected, preserved by the environment or lack of environment on the moon. We can see the astronaut footpaths still. I think that's amazing. Look at that. You know, our footprints on the moon are still there, pristine. And putting my For All Moonkind hat on, I believe due regard for each other means due regard for history, means we need to protect this history. We need to identify exactly what should be preserved. We need to memorialize this history. And it's not just about protecting history for, you know, a museum or whatever. Preservation is a compelling idea that can unite people rather than divide them. It's an idea that can help build a sense of community among people throughout the world. This is the basis of the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. I would change that word at the end from world to universe. It build a sense of community among people wherever they may be. I'm going to look sort of what I mean by preserving that community. You know, the best analogy we have to space exploration right now is the migration of Polynesians throughout the South Seas. So think about it. It's the exact same. The Polynesians stood on islands and they looked out and saw nothing except water on the horizon. And yet, and we see stars that we're going to, they saw nothing. And yet they built boats and they sailed into that horizon, into that nothingness. Think about the courage and bravery of those individuals. But what did they do? They didn't just leave behind. They brought their culture with them. You see, there's cultures throughout these islands. They brought that community with them wherever they went. With that community came the knowledge, the experience of how to grow food. It came with them the knowledge of how to build boats. That's what I mean by protecting cultural heritage. It is about protecting our sense of identity, our sense of selves, but it's also about giving our future selves the tools they need to ensure these communities continue. So while it may be argued, you know, that there's a lot of time before we're all back to the moon, although I did see an infographic this morning that shows, I think, 30 plus missions planned between now and 2026. Think about that. The moon is going to get very crowded. We have a resource on the moon that needs our protection right away, and that's our history. We have made some inroads. The One Small Step Act asks us to use the concept of due regard to protect Apollo lunar landing sites. Very proud of this legislation, which we wrote for All Moonkind. Unfortunately, it protects only U.S. heritage sites, which makes sense. The U.S. can't claim to protect other sites, but we need this feeling to permeate the international community. We also have the concept of protecting heritage in the Artemis Accords, which are now signed, yay, by 23 nations, 24 if you count the Isle of Man. Yesterday, it was announced that Rwanda and Nigeria, the first nations from the African continent to sign the Artemis Accords. So we are starting to see building this community based around the Artemis Accords. I know there's arguments about, how those Artemis Accords came to be, but this is the kind of thing that we want to see. We want to see more signatories. We want people to push back. We want other nations to push back. We want commercial industry to push back, because communities, we fight within our families, we fight with each other all the time, right? We need to have the strength in our community to be able to fight with each other peacefully. I just talked, this concept of human heritage protection continues to gain steam, at least within the United States. This was a lunar landing and operations policy analysis prepared by NASA, talking about the need for human heritage protection, talking about a need for an internationally agreed process to identify heritage sites. Because again, I want to remind you, it's the decisions we make today that will be the basis of our future. And for all mankind, I'm very close to ending, sorry. We're urging the international community to embrace a concept that's already been accepted by virtually every nation on Earth, and that's the preservation of cultural heritage. We believe if we start now looking at space not as this great empty continuum where we're just going to go out there and explore and exploit, but we know that we have so much history already there to protect, then we can create temporary heritage protection zones and talk about relating to each other, not out of exclusion and mine, and exploitation, but out of inclusion. We need to protect our history together, because that history is what's going to build our community into the future. So Gene Cernan's last words on the moon were that he wanted to remind all the people in the world that this is what we are striving for in the future. America's challenge of today has forged humanity's destiny of tomorrow, and he hoped that we leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return with peace and hope for all humankind. And I imagine we will have a lot of visions from Orion, but this is where we are, finally looking forward instead of looking back. Of course, we have to end. We are like dwarves sitting on the shoulders of giants, but it's not just the giants of Apollo. It's the giants of the Polynesians who also looked out into a nothingness and decided to build those boats, just like we're deciding to build those spacecraft. We are sitting on the shoulders of giants from all cultures throughout our human evolution, because we've all wanted to reach the stars in some way or the other. We've all been comforted by the stars in some way or the other. And so when we go to space, I hope we can build on what was created in 1967 with the Outer Space Treaty, and really put substance behind those concepts of collaboration and cooperation, so that even if it is in the human DNA to revert to separate tribes, hopefully those tribes will unite together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And I'm going to have one question for you, because we don't have much time, but I'm going to defer to other people if anyone else wants to say something. I'm going to allow 5 seconds for that. So speak up now or never.
Moon Treaty.
And with 2 words, he stifles the conversation. Yes, the Moon Treaty.
Well, I'd like to say, Michelle, that, I just have to imagine that for early Polynesians and explorers, that it must seem they very well may have believed that they were sailing to the stars. From what they could have known and perceived, the scope of the world and the universe. And I don't know if you ever looked out, especially at night, over the ocean, but it's hard to see, where that horizon begins and ends. And I can just imagine those early Polynesian explorers, believing that if they continued to sail, that they might reach one of those stars. And we are still trying.
You did. That just gave me the chills, because I never really thought about it that way, but you are absolutely right. And I'm gonna credit you, but I'm changing my presentation, because it is. They probably did think they were going to reach the stars. Absolutely. That's such a wonderful, that's beautiful imagery. Thank you for that.
They were not drawn so much as they were pushed. what got them to, what forced them essentially to do it was population pressure.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, really not that different from what we're looking at now.
Right. And it turns out that all human conflict seems to be based on resource crisis problems. So if you want people for people to behave themselves and not go into wars and stuff like that, it's very valuable indeed for them to look at a bright future.
Which is why it's so important. And the Giulio's introduction was, yes, the moon is the 8th continent and has a lot of resources, but we need to look well beyond the moon. There's a lot of places on the moon we want to protect, but when you look at it, those resources are limited. So we need to get to the moon and use it as a starting point, but we really need to look well beyond the moon.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt the discussion because we are not only pressed for time, but we also may have some little problems of storage space. So I don't want this to last too much longer than 3 hours. So thanking Michèle again, I will give the floor to Giuseppe. Giuseppe, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I try to share the screen. Let me see if this is happening. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Yeah, now I have to go to full screen, which is, of course, more difficult. Now, let me see. Just a second.
Wait for that. I want to tell everyone a trick that can be done in this case, which is to set your presentation to run in window mode. That makes it so much easier to share it in a Zoom meeting.
There you go.
Okay, but you can see now, right?
We can.
Sure.
We can indeed.
All right. Okay. So again, good morning, good afternoon. And of course, thank you to Giulio for a kind invitation. This is a very important milestone, these 50 years. And in fact, I like to take it from a slightly different point that what Michèle talked about. So 50 years ago, basically, were the United States that they have been going to the moon, of course, in the name of all humanity. And today, 50 years later, we are looking to increase global cooperation and coordination. And so this is what I will share with you. And I will take as an example the organization which I have, let's say, set up. As Michèle said, a couple of words about myself. I have worked 35 years at the European Space Agency. And after that, a number of years ago, I initiated a number of activities. One of them has been the Space Resources, the Hague Working Group, which has led to the working group, which is now initiated basically this year at the level of the COPUOS. And then in 2017, we initiated the Moon Village Association, which is what I'm going to tell you and what is the relevance for what we are discussing today, which is basically going to the moon and try to foster the collaboration and coordination in a very concrete way. Just before this meeting, I had the pleasure to participate in a webinar about lunar mobility together with the JAXA, which basically presented different approaches to lunar mobility from Toyota to Lockheed Martin. And this is, of course, something which is helping also discussion from the different organizations. But let me get you, so first of all, what is it, the Moon Village Association? Why was it created? This is not written in there. So let me share the consideration which were at the root of the organization. The root of the organization was the consideration which somehow Michèle touched, which NGO in general, let's say not necessarily in space, they have played a major role, as you know, in the environment as well as in human rights. NGO are very powerful. And so we have started to observe in a paper what was the impact of NGO in general on different social issues, and then what was the impact on space. And so we realized that in space, apart from some organization like International Astronautical Federation and International Academy of Astronautics, at the global level, there was not really a specific organization which we are trying to bring together different multi-stakeholder And we felt that obviously we needed one, in particular for the next step of humanity. I worked 16 years in the International Space Station, and I have seen with my eyes, I participated in all the negotiation, as well as all different kind of implementation that the ISS took within the ESA and together with the United States and the other partners. So I've seen how cumbersome it was. So it was felt that we needed to set up an organization, an NGO, which could play a role in trying to bring together on a thematic issues like the moon, basically multi-stakeholder. That's the reason why we set up this organization, which includes individuals as well as organization that's called an association. And we called Moon Village because in 2017, the word Moon Village was good enough and spread enough to illustrate the principle of community of multi-stakeholder. We try to cooperate in an open way. And that is exactly what we set up. So we set it up in Vienna. And so this was done in 2017. And it is really a global organization because I'm pleased to see that we have at least 60 countries which are participating in this organization. When you compare to 100 countries, which is what is presently in COPOS, we are not doing too bad. So hopefully there are room for improvements, and that's what we will do. But we have also a number of institutional members as well as partners. So today, in particular, Michèle, as for all Moonkind, as well as for the NSS, we have both signed memorandum of understanding with them, as well with SRI, Space Renaissance, since we have also an MOU. So we have really cooperation with many organizations. And the reason and the goal in principle is what we're going to explain, but it's going to work on specific items to bring all these different entities, stakeholders together. And I want to emphasize particularly the public, because again, when I was in ESA, I did realize that the public was a kind of forgotten item. So I think we felt that bringing the public in the possibility to participate in many of the topics was very important. So in the meantime, we have, of course, become member observer of the United Nations, and we are bringing a number of topics, as you will see in a moment, related to the moon to the table of the United Nations. We are also member of the International Astronautical Federation. But let's see practically what are we talking about. Because, of course, I am a very pragmatic and practical person, so you will hear a lot of practical issues here. So I'm not going to talk about all these different topics, but this gives you an idea that the organization is dealing with a lot of issues. So if I take the participating of emerging space country, where I don't think I do have a chart, basically the goal of this group is to solicit basically the involvement of developing country in the concept of the Moon Village. Not necessarily country which have a lot of money, which they can, let's say, pay for developing large infrastructure, but even country like we have it in South America, Nepal, and many others, Lebanon, that really have population very interested in the topic of the moon exploration. And this, it's important to do that as a capacity building so that they will be able, and they are able to participate to some of the project. Even if there is a university in Africa which is dealing with, let's say, study related to how habitation on the moon, that of course already grant them to participate. So we help them to create a so-called roadmap, which then try to bring them together with National Space Agency. And we have very good example which go from Egypt to, as I said, South America to the Asian country. So this is an important topic, and we are also trying to work with the United Nations in this particular area. As we all know, Artemis Accord, it's a lot of country, but this country needs indeed to be able to raise their level of skills in some area, or they can offer to us a lot. Then we are having also analog. So there are analog facilities in many countries around the world. So this group is trying to bring them together, basically all these different facilities, so that the people, local people, can really basically work with each other. And what we have noticed is that a lot of developing countries, they are planning to develop analog facility because it's cheap and is a very immediate way for the population to get involved. And even in some countries like Jordan, they are thinking also to use that as mixing with tourism, which I think is important. So I think analog is really a very concrete, let me say, way to approach the lunar exploration. Then I will show one chart for some of those so that you can get an idea of the kind of activity. So on the top of that, what is important is that similar to some other organization, we have present on the field, because you need to talk the language, talking about the public. And so that's the reason why we have about 50 national coordinator, which are working very much also with the Space Generation Advisory Council, which, as you know, is another organization which is really trying to basically raise awareness and basically development of the young generation. And we have also particularly a working group which is towards the Moon Village generation, which is trying to really solicit and help the people to participate. So you can see that the spread of this national coordinator is quite wide. Now let me talk about what is also behind my image. So we have a working group which is called basically Moon Village 2045 out of the architecture working group. This is chaired by John Mankins, which I'm sure many of you knows. And this has been for the first time that we have brought together a number of global stakeholders and trying to think about how a Moon Village, which is not necessarily the Artemis base camp, as Giulio was saying, because Artemis base camp is a clear connotation, but we were looking to multiple settlement of different countries. And so the work, it has been going on for a few years. And this, for the first time, we now have seen a kind of building blocks of this, what is called now OASIS 2045. And what you see basically in this picture, which is also behind my screen, is one artistic image of the landing site of a number of building blocks, which include in situ resource utilization, basic habitability, as well as power, and so forth and so on. And you can see also a vehicle just in the front, because we also need to move. So actually in the ISAC-G, which is the International Space Exploration Coordination Group, they did not have yet this, let's say, kind of study at the level of the different country. And so we have also been presenting this to ISAC-G, and we are increasing the connection with the different space agencies. So this is definitely an important aspect. The other aspect, which is of course very close to myself, it is what we have been saying earlier. There are a lot of missions going to the moon, basically, and from all different stakeholders. So, and some of them, they will be conducted in very close proximity. So right now, in spite of all goodwill of our good friends, lawyers and treaty, we do not have a clear coordination mechanism which would regulate how people are going to behave on the moon. And so there is a need to create a confidence building to really get a cooperation. So in order to a cooperation. So therefore, in 2000, we have initiated a group which is called Global Expert Group on Sustainable Lunar Activity. It has worked for 2 years, and we are now coming to an end. Basically, in a week time, the work will be completed and is going to be published in early 2023. And this group, for your information, includes all the major stakeholders. We're very pleased to say we have a very large Japanese, Chinese contingent, as well as US, all the major players at the level of industry, at the level of government, at the level of state organizations, we have the State Department, as well as we have Ministry of Foreign Affairs from China. They all participated in this group, and we managed to reach consensus on a document which will then be given to United Nations COPOS for further deliberation. We have already a fairly clear way forward, which we would like to proceed on this. But the important point is that the country needs to realize that it is urgent. We all discussed earlier that there is a working group of space resources. Space resources is an important topic. As I said, I was at the root of these building blocks working group, but space resources is going to take a few years. What is really urgent now is to agree how to behave on the moon. And I think this is what also many countries, including the United States and China, realize. And this is hopefully what is going to get started by bringing on the table this document and hopefully try to foster further discussion at the level of this organization. So this is a clear, very concrete, let's say, proposal and activity. Then in Los Angeles, MVA has held every year a yearly workshop. This year it was in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, we published the Lunar Commerce, from the Lunar Commerce Working Group, the Lunar Commerce Portfolio, which is a very extensive 2 years of work, which is a very extensive work, which present 9 segments of different, let's say, possible lunar business. And again, this is the first time that this is done in so much detail. This has been made available for free, is available on the website. But we have partners also with the university, which will help us in completing this work, as well as in order to, let's say, customize this kind of study for the different industry that will be interested to get a better prediction of what their business model will be. Then we have also an important cultural consideration working group. I just put there some of the different, let me say, webinars which have been organized. I think the goal is a very important. Many people tend to underestimate, to concentrate cultural aspect towards the technical. I think when you talk about the public, the only way to interact with the public is via cultural. So cultural is a very important aspect of all what we do, and it is the way to enter in contact with the public. So we had a number of webinars which were related also to Arabics, modus of conceiving the moon, to let's say South America. These are just few of them. And so I understand that this is now going to be continued in synergy with Space Renaissance, where we have signed an MOU. And so we will go deeper with them in dealing with some of the issue. I have the opportunity here that Frank is here with us. And I think an important concept, which again, I feel very important, is when the Chinese landed on the backside of the moon, on the dark side of the moon, I really felt that the so-called deep space, let's say, principle, which is basically you never see the Earth, you just see the space. It is something which will require certain further analysis and in-depth discussion. And I think this working group, together with Space Renaissance and other people, hopefully will be able to dig with it. Then connected with that is how to operationalize the overview effect. So again, this is the very simple idea, but of course, only few people have seen the Earth from the moon, and the number is not going to be high. So a very simple idea is to develop a camera which is going to be on a lunar lander and send images via video streaming on your telephone. So the idea is that soon, in 2 or 3 years, you will be able, through an application like you are doing now for the space station, to see how does it look, basically Earth from the moon. I think this will be a very major, let's say, boost in trying to bring close the people on Earth, the moon. And so this will be able to, for the people really to understand that we are there, and so we are all one. So I think this is, you can look at it as operationalization of the overview effect. We are started the phase A of this activity. We have a consortium of industry, which you can see over there, and we do hope that this kind of camera, which by the way can be used also for other scientific purposes, will be able to fly on one of the future lunar lander. Then I like to touch base on another initiative, which the MVA started in 2021. So we proposed to the to the COPOS in August of 2021, the creation of International Moon Day. And given that there were the right political conditions at that time, which are not any longer, as you know, existing since February, we managed to have a very fast approval immediately after 3 months from the General Assembly. So the bottom line is that as of December of last year, the United Nations approved, as you can see in the 66th session, the International Moon Day. And so 20th of July is now the International Moon Day, like Asteroid Day is on the 30th of June, as well as the Space Week is the beginning of October. So the goal of this International Moon Day is again to create awareness of the moon exploration, to give the opportunity to the stakeholder industry as well as government to explain what they are doing, to discuss with the public, as well as to present basically cooperation between different countries. So the MVA took the initiative to propose, and so I took the initiative to also organize this International Moon Day. The chairman of this group is from Saudi Arabia, which is the only country which is running today on a lunar calendar. And so I think it was very motivated to take this position, and he has it still. And so in 2022 was the first year. We managed to have around 40 events organized, what we call bottom-up events, or local events. You can see few of them in this image, but there are many countries, 23 countries organized event during the week of the 20th of July. And we had a major event organized in Huntsville, Alabama, where basically, as you all know, the Apollo and the Saturn program started. So it was in a way to restart from where everything has been initiated. So it was a kind of circle. And we plan for 2023 to double the number of countries which will participate in the International Moon Day. And of course, we rely on all of you to try to spread the words, and we are going to go out with calls for basically inviting people to proposal. And with that, I think I am within the time. I would like to close and thank you so much, Giulia, for the opportunity to present this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe, and especially I want to thank you for staying exactly on time. Right. It doesn't happen that often, and I usually feel very bad when I have to ask a speaker to cut through an interesting presentation at the end. So we do have time for 1 or 2 questions for Giuseppe. Maybe you should stop sharing your screen. Okay. Yes. Questions for Giuseppe?
It's all clear.
I'll give you 5 seconds before saying something myself. Okay, this is actually what I wanted to say after Michèle's talk. When Michèle at some point said that space should not be a lawless Wild West frontier, which is something that you hear very often these days. It's very politically correct. I wanted to play the devil's advocate, and that also applies as a comment to your talk, Giuseppe. As a devil advocate, I will just mention the very politically incorrect idea that perhaps it's too soon for space law, in the sense that if we start introducing too many regulations and mutual accords and all that, that will just slow down progress toward space frontier. Michèle had a screenshot from The Expanse, and I remember that toward the end of the series, one of the characters, who of course happens to be one of the bad guys, says exactly that. Yes, you should come with your laws and regulation, but let me build a post office first. That's what that guy said. I must say that within nuances and with all qualifications needed, I do tend to agree with that position myself. So since I believe that neither Giuseppe nor Michèle would agree, what would be your answer to that?
Can I have the chance to say something there? So first of all, I think what you said, I don't think it's completely correct, because in some of our working group, like GEGSLA, we have industry, and industry is also asking to have some sort of regulation. Over-regulation is something, but a minimum, let's say, common level playing fields is interest of everyone, including industry. So I will argue that the industry interest is not to have a Wild West, but it is to have a minimum regulated, let me say, kind of activity, because they need interoperability, they need a number of different ways how to relate with other partners. So I don't think that even except for the transportation industry, which might be a different story, where they see themselves just as a transporter without any boundary, but all the other industry are very much interested and keen to have some rules, and that's why we included them in our working group. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks,
Giuseppe, and of course, as long as we don't fall into over-regulation, I do not disagree with that. Michèle, anything to say?
Thank you, Giuseppe. You responded very well, exactly how I would have. Investors want certainty, and I have had investors come to me and say, we don't really care what the law says, we just need it. So because we can build the reserves we need against what we know, we can't build reserves against uncertainty. But I will say, I completely agree with you. What we don't want is, code violation 6.1.A/4B little Roman I1 and little Roman 2. What we want are continuing guidelines and principles, much like the Outer Space Treaty, much like the Artemis Accords, which build at least a sense of what we definitely don't want to do or don't want to happen. Frankly, we don't have property rights without some sort of framework. And I strongly believe we need property rights in space, however we're going to define them.
Thank you very much, Michèle. It was a good answer, as Giuseppe's answer was also good. Actually, you said the same thing. I'd like now to continue giving the floor to Adriano. Adriano, the floor is yours.
Unmute.
I'm here. Okay. No, I thought that Marlène was going to talk before me, but however, okay, I'm ready. So let me share my presentation. Okay. You can see it?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Okay, fine. So I am Adriano Autino. I am the founder and former president of Space Renaissance International, as Giuseppe kindly said, and Giulio too. And today I will, okay, my presentation will be, let me say, it contains a proposal. Our proposal of an 18th SDG to kick off space civilian space development before 2030, because this is what we need, what humanity needs. And so how to make this goal, space for all, to become a reality. So what does it mean? First of all, space for all, what we can see looking at Earth from orbit and what we can perceive looking outside, the unsustainable 17 SDGs of the United Nations, the astropolitics and astro-utopias, a critical coexistence, the need for agreed cultural battle that involve all of the space community. So all of us and more, the other organizations that are not here today, but they are engaged for our same ideals and goals. So our point now is to see what will be the best way to organize and put together these efforts to crack the door. And yes, as Michèle said, to crack the door. And that means to open the Ike frontier. So Space for All, what does it mean? It was the title of the recent IAF Congress, the 73rd in Paris in September. I see three possible meaning of this title. Using space for Earth, it means benefits from space science and technology, and now from space resources for everybody on Earth. Or opening the Ike frontier, easy and safe access to outer space for all of the Earth's citizens willing to emigrate. And C, a new broad horizon for development over the crisis of the closed world in a finally open world philosophy. We can say maybe all of the three, but of course we have to better understand the priorities because there is not much time. So if we see to the 21st century geopolitics, we see that the resource wars updated their goals, but not their practice of murder and destruction. The high demand of microchips by the electronic society promotes the rare earths and the regions, each of them as a primary target. The energy demand by the internet society is bigger than the one of the previous mechanical society. And non-terrestrial sources, including renewable and nuclear, will be enough. The industrial society is seriously compromised. The social fear is growing, paving the path to new wars, conflicts, dictatorships, and authoritarian regimes. So this is the situation in the closed world, because the world is still closed, philosophically closed. Then, if we look at the astropolitics of this century, it concerns the geolunar space now. Alberto Cavallo, during his recent lecture on the webinar series of Space Renaissance Academy, made some very sharp and meaningful consideration. Astropolitical thesis in the hard version is either governments and powerful organizations support expansion into space now, aiming at space power, or no expansion into space will happen. And we have to note that the situation is strongly changed with regards to a few years ago. Now, governments and powerful organizations believe in expansion into space and they want to expand. So the first question, can expansion into space take place thanks to the goodwill of enlightened leaders, or is it the pursuit of international power required? Second question, can expansion into space happen without bringing all of our rivalries in it? And that's the meaning of regulation that we are discussing before. A note, on 12 August 2022, the US Vice President Kamala Harris declared that the current space regulations are outdated and must be replaced. So the true space race is starting now, and it is about use of resources and settlement, not just science. National interest comes in as a fundamental factor. Competition among nations will now fuel the expansion and seems to be more effective than cooperation. Watching to the solar system, it is a conditional future. Mars holds an enormous potential as a logistic pole between internal and external solar system, the asteroid belt and the Jupiter's moon. Thinking about the scenario of the expanse that Michèle was mentioning before. The decisions that will be taken before 2030 are of great essential relevance. So this future or other futures will depend on the decision we take before 2030. Unfortunately, the current vision of the world is still a pre-Copernican vision. Planet Earth is also called the planet, if it was the only planet. And around Earth, there are impenetrable crystal balls. So this is the philosophical vision still dominating. However, Earth is in space. Our mother planet Earth is the third planet of our solar system. We can naturally expand in the solar system and beyond with the help of our natural resources, curiosity, intelligence, science, technology. We are immersed in a cosmic ecology. Nature is the same in the whole universe. Plato, Bruno, Kepler, and other philosophers said. Oh, sorry. So some space cultural achievements coming from the overview effect, if we want to refer to that, having here the author, of course. Looking at Earth from outside, we realize that Earth is not the planet, yet one celestial body as many others in our solar system and beyond. Earth is a very small grain of sand in a boundless universe. We are very fragile and precarious until we are confined on Earth. Boundaries are not visible from space. Earth is a unique territory and humans are one only people. Fighting for the last scarce resources on Earth's surface is crazy nonsense. Looking outside at space, we also understand that our vision of the world can be very much larger than just Earth. In the solar system, there are more space and resources than we need for many trillions of people, for many centuries and millennia to come. And what we need, all what we need is to concentrate our efforts to win the Earth gravitational well and to kick off expanding into a greater world, the internal solar system, just to start. Doing that, we will also learn how to take care of our mother planet. And an important consideration made by Kraft-Ericke in his paper, Why Mankind Must Colonize Space in 1950, humans are children, not pets of the biosphere. We have to continue to emancipate ourselves because we are children of the biosphere. We are not pets. Should we let nature to do its job? Yes, let's humankind, the highest agent of nature, to do the nature's job, to expand life into the solar system and beyond, and to keep on evolving. So some consideration about our relation with the rest of nature. There are three main concepts. The ego concept is the seigniorage of male man over nature. Note that women is seen as a part of nature together with other animals, brackets. The ecologist view, woman and man equal to other animals, the same level. And the serving view, men and women to serve the rest of nature. I believe that the three of these are not, okay, the first one is really wrong because it's all the backwise and so on. Even the equal view is doesn't give the proper rights and characteristics to each kind of beings, and the serving the rest of nature is yes, is a good sentiment, but it's not enough, because we also have to serve ourselves, not only the rest of nature. So dolphins are nice and intelligent, yet we can discuss about morals and ethics with the dolphin or with the chimpanzee. Ours are understanding and awareness. Ours is responsibility. So the point is that we are sentient beings together with other sentient beings. We are developed intelligence and awareness. Therefore, we have the biggest responsibility on this planet and more. Intelligence is not an on-off property, yet a gradual one. Dolphins, chimpanzees, and few other species are currently esteemed capable of individual self-awareness. All of the animal species can feel pain and sufferance, being sentient beings. Moral rules and ethical reasoning can be applied only to beings which understand and can discuss, approve, share the rules. Compassion for all sentient is a universal ethical principle to avoid causing sufferance as much as possible. Let's think about that. We will not go alone into space. We will bring with us many of these spaces, and going out, expanding outside, we will also relieve the Earth environment, leaving more space and possibility to survive to other sentient beings on Earth. So the point is that without future, there's no hope. And it can also be reversed. No hope, no future. So, okay. Greg Mariniak, together with Peter Diamandis, they were the promoters of the X Prize that I believe the X Prize opened the door to the new space sector in the early 2000s. Greg told me in an interview we had together in 2020, we have exhausted the resources in the planetary ecological niche that has raised us so far. The resources of the solar system will be enough for millennia for the development of many trillions of solar system citizens. The useful launch window may close sooner than we expected under the strokes of multiple crises. The future would no longer be the one dreamed by the best science fiction, but the dystopian one imagined by the post-catastrophe narrative. There is a very urgent need to realize the best future now. So this is the sense of urgency that is driving myself and the Space Renaissance organization to conceive that final resolution of our third Congress in 2021, that is including this goal to start, to kick off space expansion, the civilian space development before 2030, or it could be too late. So, sorry. Okay, so going to the SDGs. These are the 17 SDGs of the UN Agenda for 2030. Sorry, let me see my time. I am half of my presentation, okay. So we, analyzing the 17 goals, we see that 3 of them are key, are pillars that if they work, they will support and sustain all of the others. These are the 7, 8, and 9, the affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So I have redesigned the hierarchical pyramid of the 17 goals. I have put these 3 goals, 7, 8, and 9 at the basis, all the social issues in the middle, and the environmental goals here, and the methodology that are peace and cooperation. But the point is, are these 3 pillars sustainable? This is the true question and the challenge in the closed system, of course, in the closed world. Are these 3 goals sustainable? We think not, because terrestrial development is a no-way perspective. There are several conflictual factors. The main of them is energy demand increased by web society and electric mobility. Scarcity of key materials, rare earths, raising new reservoirs and conflicts. Pollution increased by disposal of batteries and technological waste. Oceans overexploitation and pollution. Social issues increased by multiple crises. So if we try to boost these 3 key pillars, we will immediately crash with climate action, life below water, life on land. This is the situation. And let's think about a couple of other things. Civilization without paper is maybe realizing it, because we are now reading newspapers on tablets and computers and telephones. And these make the green life on Earth to be happy. But we are also concerned about plastic. And if we want to use less plastic, making happy the sea creatures, the animals that live in the sea, we will have to use more paper. And we are back to cutting trees. So these are a few contradictions that nobody thinks, because every time we think about plastic, we say, oh, we have to abandon plastic. Every time we think about paper, we have to abandon paper. But we are not seeing that the two things are contradictory each other, if we are confined on Earth, of course. So the history of culture came from stone. This is the Rosetta Stele, to paper, to electronics. Also, the history of money is going a similar thread, from money, physical money, to paper money, to electronic money. So where we are going? We are going to a very much more performing civilization, but more fragile. More and more we are based upon electricity, and our civilization is becoming more performant, but more fragile. While stones and pyramids survived millennia, electronic culture may die and fully disappear in few years. Paper culture would perish too. Missing electronic continuous monitoring and control, books will quickly decay and become unreadable. Expanding into space, building managed space libraries fed by solar power will establish the pillars of an anti-fragile strategy. So this is securing our civilization. It should be one of the main goals of this time. The civilization can maybe survive without paper, but not without electricity. The less we will use paper, the more we will need electricity and electronic infrastructures. So securing civilization, it means expanding into space, because expanding civilization into space will mean increasing our capability to master cosmic accidents, increasing security of our cultural assets and knowledge, mitigating the risk of solar storms over electronic infrastructures by proper shields and mobility in space. The above will allow making our global electronic infrastructure less fragile, making our civilization less fragile. So in order to get all of that, we need an 18 point, an 18 goal, the civilian space development that will sustain, by achieving abundant resources of the solar system, sustain the 3 key pillars and all of the rest of the castle, and assure an environmental relief on Earth, because we will move our industrial activities outside. So the key word is sustainability. And it means, first of all, survival of civilization. I'm trying to go faster now because I'm in my last 10 minutes. So there is a missing dimension in the SDGs. We have the 15 life on lands, living condition of humans and other forms of life on Earth's surface. We have SDG 14, life underwater, living condition of forms of life in the seas, mainly non-human. From the Earth depends human Earth too. And what is missing, completely missing, is life in space. Humans and other forms of life living in space habitats, both in orbit and planetary infrastructures, and possible extraterrestrial forms of life. So the title was an 18 SDG, but maybe we need 2 more SDG, not only 1, but 18 and 19. Okay, civilian space development will assure energy, progressive relocation of the industrial development to the geolunar space will restrict the energy demand on Earth's surface to the one of private citizens. So this will halve the demand of energy on Earth. It will assure social growth. Development of civilian astronautic industry will raise economy at double figure, business opportunity and employment accordingly. So this will benefit all of the social goals. Peace and collaboration, wars for resources will deliver to history, losing their main cause. Environment will be relieved of the burden of industrial development. And one more thing that is not covered, maybe it will be covered by life in space, cosmic safety. Extraterrestrial development will mitigate the risk of premature extinction of our species by cosmic accidents. So what we need is to build a broad alliance. The space community needs to speak louder with a stronger voice. Lobbying politicians and international institutions is necessary, yet not sufficient. Bureaucracies will really move ahead only when they will feel the pressure from the public opinion at large. We need to talk directly to the society. We need to join together the most prominent space advocacy organizations on a simple platform made up by few shared goals to build a broad alliance on the proposal of an 18 SDG to the United Nations. Not that we are talking about that. Before me, Giuseppe was talking about our conversations, our memorandums of understanding with MVA, with the NSS, and with other organizations. And we will be trying, we are starting to discuss maybe one or more appointments in 2023 to try to develop this alliance a little bit more. So, but why an 18 SDG and likely a 19 are needed? A new horizon of development. Earth citizens that recently overcame the threshold of 8 billion are in deep need of a new horizon of development. Expanding into outer space is the sole way to make the 17 SDGs really sustainable. The 17 SDGs need to be updated because they were conceived and approved in 2015 when general space policy was not advanced as it is nowadays. Reusable rockets were just to be experimented for the first time. The new space economy didn't yet have the impetuous growth that's going on during the last 2 years. Space is playing a key role for global sustainability, assuring a powerful line of industrial development essential for the 7, 8, and 9 SDGs. A missing environment is space. The 7 SDGs cover life on Earth and life in water, yet not life in space. This is a serious gap to be filled. And last but not least, the COP structure is old and outdated. It needs a serious revamping. Space law and space policy are the key subjects to be outdated. The Artemis Accord was made with the aim to provide a new framework to integrate the Outer Space Treaty. So going quickly to the end, we need to work on space policy, space science, and space awareness at large. So about space policy, fully reusable, safe and ergonomic vehicles for civilian passengers and cargo transportation in space. Producing fuel in space from moon and asteroid resources, this is fundamental. Whatever strategy we want to implement, producing fuel in space is the next step. First is reusable rockets, second is fueling space. Removing orbital debris and their reutilization as in situ space resources, building logistic infrastructures and habitats in orbit and Earth-Moon Lagrange points endowed with simulated gravity. Moon and asteroid mining to get materials for space infrastructure construction, sustaining the new space industry worldwide by grants and fiscal reductions, training and education, collaboration between space agencies and private enterprises, sustaining the space tourism industry and market segment, currently the only sector trying to transport untrained civilians in space. Science should enable life in space. Living and working in space is totally different from short exploration scientific missions. The mission requirements are different, particularly with respect to human health. There's a number of scientific issues which need better consideration and priority. It is our main recommendation to the UN that such research streams, as well as the above mentioned space strategy, will be promoted in every context where strategic decisions are undertaken. Protection against sun and cosmic radiation is the first point, necessary to allow long time and permanent residence in space. And Michèle was talking about this when she mentioned the expanse and the different conditions that the migrants will be exposed to, living on Mars or on the moon with different gravity, or on the belt on asteroids, among asteroids and so on. Simulated gravity necessary to avoid the quick change of human physiology, giving the freedom to space settlers to go back to Earth when they like so. Green environment and water in space, necessary to assure an environment similar to the earthly one for biological and psychological need. Space challenge, enabling industry in space. So producing fuel in space, asteroid moon mining, space debris recovery, space energy production, low-cost space transportation systems, and the questions needing urgent answer. What the needed technologies? Which scientific concept for a baseline? What the minimum investment requirement to start? What possible return of investment? What legal regulation context is necessary? Please note that the Space Renaissance Academy has several committees working on each one of these points and trying to deepen the knowledge and to take positions to really enhance all of this culture. Okay, I finished 2 minutes before my time. So thanks for your attention. This is my book for everyone who can search it on Amazon. And of course, all of you are invited to join the Space Renaissance as a member. We are an activist organization. We need you and our partners to work together. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adriano. And I want to mention that I'm also a member of Space Renaissance, as well as the Moon Village Association. And I have read Adriano's book, which I very warmly recommend. I have it in the original Italian version, but I have also the English translation.
Yes.
And I can tell you guys that it is a very good book. Now, let's see if anyone has a question for Adriano. Otherwise, I'll say something. 5 seconds as usual. 3, 2, 1, stop. Okay, Adriano, you said, and I 100% agree with that, that the politicians, all this political establishment will not get things moving unless they feel a very strong pressure from the public opinion. And therefore, we should energize the public opinion.
Yeah.
And ensure that it fully supports space. Now, my question is, we have been trying to do that for 50 years. Nothing much has happened. So evidently, we need to do something new that has not been done before. How do you propose to do that in a much better and much more efficient way?
Yes, let me say, when I was in Paris at the IAC 73 in September, I was very surprised by, let me say, the huge number of people going to this Congress in Paris, to the number of government people, ministers of the French government and other nations present there, that were on the palc talking with Pascal Ehrenfreud. She was the president of IAF until September, shaking their hands and talking together. And maybe they also were, that Congress was also present in the news heads in those days, because it was really an event in Paris, not only for the space community. But this is very rare, because I think the space organization and mainly the biggest one, that is IAF, maybe, I don't know if IAF or NSS is the biggest one in the world. However, when did you see IAF or NSS in a television broadcast for large public? Myself, never. So what we need is to go outside, to break the wall of the media and talk to the large public audience. because there is something that is not understood, and is not, the guilt is not of the people. The guilt is the dominant philosophy that is pre-Copernican. So it is like the space is not, it's not a place. No, the only place is Earth. And we have to take care of Earth, and of course we have to take care of Earth, but not only, we are in a cosmic ecology. We have to start opening the mind. And to do that, we need to talk to the people. It is useless to preach to the core, no? To speak among ourselves only. Yes, we have to speak among ourselves, but only to organize a better action. If we put together our efforts, the Space Renaissance, we are still a small organization, too known, I think, in the space community. But if we put together Space Renaissance, the Moon Village Association, the NSS, the Beyond Earth Institute is becoming important too, and other one, the Mars Society, we have to succeed, to say something together, even if it only be two things. We don't need to agree on everything. No, we have to choose. If we can agree on the 18 SDG, that I think that will be a big argument to break the media wall, and to go outside and speaking to the people. So this will be our proposal. We will have organizational meetings, and we will try to discuss a possible public event in Europe, and maybe in the US and other countries. So this is what we can propose. And of course, just to complete the answer, this also reply to your unspoken question, because you were asking to me, do you think that politics has a role in this? And my answer is yes, politics is important. I say this because in the space community, many people think that, many space activists, passionate space, think that politics is not important because it will be private enterprise that will open the frontier. This is true and not true. We need, the challenge is very, very big, because as I said, if we don't do it before 2030, we will be too late maybe. That we need a choral effort. We need to get some politicians on board to have the courage to speak and to say, people, you know what, we have to go to space because it's the only future possible.
Thank you very much, Adriano. I must confess that I'm not that optimistic about our ability to say to the public and to the politicians something new that has not been said so far. But well, you know, Christmas is coming, and let's be optimistic, as one should be in Christmas time.
We need everybody.
Say that, I would like to...
Politicians, we need lawyers, we need...
yeah, sure. I would like now to give the floor to Marlène.
Bye.
Marlène, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giulio. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I won't have any slides today. I will do my presentation just reading, but my name is Dr. Marlène Michèle Losier. I'm a legal expert in international law and principal of the legal boutique Losier Gonzalez, based in Washington, D.C., where I advise on international and national laws in areas where sovereignty and jurisdiction conflict or are evoked, often as effects of state succession in areas beyond national jurisdiction in maritime, terrestrial, and beyond Earth contexts. I am pleased to participate in the Terasem Colloquium celebrating the 50th anniversary of Apollo 17's launch back to Earth and the last time humans were on the moon.
Can you raise your volume? Can you raise your volume a bit?
Let me try. Okay. Does this work better? Is this okay?
It is for me, or I mean, maybe if we just move a bit closer to the microphone, it will work. But it's already good enough.
Okay. So let me know if anything. So I was saying that I was pleased to participate. I'm pleased to participate in the Terasem Colloquium celebrating the 50th anniversary of Apollo 17's launch back to Earth and the last time humans were on the moon. It is an honor to be amongst much esteemed colleagues and several dear friends, Michèle, Adriano, also on the panel. Giulio, thank you for the invitation to the colloquium. The intention of my remarks today is to provide a general overview of the opportunities afforded under international law for civil society actors to participate in the development of law and policy relating to the exploration and use of outer space, including on the moon and other celestial bodies. The opportunities for civil society organizations to which I refer are distinguished from those more well-established and likely better known rights and responsibilities codified under the United Nations Treaty Regime for nation states under the normative framework of space law and international law generally. Under the UN regime, civil society organizations are known also as non-governmental organizations, or NGOs. They are nonprofit, voluntary citizens groups organized on a local, national, or international level, as we have heard earlier during this call. Civil society organizations represent civil actors, including individuals not associated with government. They are groups that have developed self-initiated programs that can facilitate links between the United Nations and individuals, as well as diversely themed communities around the world. Speaking about the rights that may be exercised by civil society organizations is particularly exciting, given our audience of space professionals and enthusiasts. It is exciting also because it allows one to reflect on the immeasurable ability of human beings throughout history to study the skies, learn about the relationship of our Earth to other celestial bodies, and our incredible ability throughout millennia and across cultures in all regions of the world to utilize, explore, and give a plethora of meaning to space, the stars, planets, and the universe in sum. Without relaying the significance of these historical and collective human contributions to the immense capacity of our recent and current abilities to venture beyond our indigenous planet and utilize varied space resources for the benefit of human societies on and beyond Earth, it is important to recognize the critical role that civil society has played in that progress. Therefore, for all civil society that continues to contribute to the development of space exploration, or in turn is inspired to contribute even further to that development, it becomes important to identify the rights existing under international law that can facilitate that participation in the development of space law and policies that inevitably impact economic, social, cultural, educational, health, and other matters directly affecting civil actors themselves. As you may know, in 1959, the UN General Assembly established the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space to govern the exploration and use of space for the benefit of all humanity. The committee, with the support of its legal subcommittee and its scientific and technical subcommittee, both created in 1961, was instrumental in the creation of the treaties and principles governing outer space. To date, the COPUOS is the only committee of the UN General Assembly that exclusively addresses international cooperation in space with the objective of achieving peace, security, and development. It is a unique forum for monitoring and discussing developments in this field and that have evolved alongside technical advancements in space exploration, geopolitical changes, and evolving uses of space science and technology for sustainable development. The COPUOS reports to the UN General Assembly's Special Political and Decolonization Committee, or the fourth of the UN General Assembly's 6 committees. The UN Office of Outer Space, which is an office of the UN Secretariat, one of 6 UN organs, supports the COPUOS and assists in the implementation of its work. The COPUOS hosts the collaboration, as you may know, of UN member states, of which there are now over 100 that take part in the committee. The committee, however, also allows for the participation of intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations who can apply for observer status. Permanent observer status can be obtained for non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations after receiving special consultative status from the UN Economic and Social Council. That council is like the UN Secretariat, another of the UN organs, and has granted special UN consultative status to currently about 6,000 civil society organizations. The number of civil society organizations with or seeking observer status at the COPUOS in order to participate in the work of the committee amongst member states is steadily increasing. Therefore, civil society organizations with intention of partaking in space activities and policy discussions, certainly within the COPUOS or more broadly in the UN system, but even outside it, may benefit from familiarizing themselves with the provisions under international law that could facilitate that involvement. As you may know, there's been a remarkable shift, particularly during the second decade of the century, in the exploration and use of space, from one mainly dominated by nation-state actors to a vastly more collaborative one, inclusive of even more COPUOS member states, but particularly those in various stages of their spacefaring capacity and development, and also including intergovernmental organizations, academia, private actors, such as those with commercial interests, as well as communities of individuals, or in other terms, civil society actors. This shift has demarcated civil society's growing interest and ambition to participate in space development. The eagerness of civil society organizations is evidenced beyond attempts to gain observer status at COPUOS to forming part or creating other global organizational frameworks where they can assert an active role for themselves in the development of space law and policy. Therefore, it is beneficial to identify key provisions and instruments of international law that may assist civil society to help realize their interest in participating in space development, particularly outside the arguably limited opportunities afforded to them by member state structured and led regime of the COPUOS and the UN generally. It is important in this regard to consider the continued evolution of the law and legal theory as it applies to rights of individuals and communities, to realize the principle of self-determination, to participate in the development of their societies, cultures, economies, education, and other matters, including space, that now has broader and increasingly significant impacts on their lives. Thus, in my view, it is advantageous to recall the relevant agreements, conventions, resolutions, recommendations, and other instruments of the UN and its specialized agencies concerning the integral development of the human being, economic and social progress and development of all peoples, including those instruments concerning decolonization, the prevention of discrimination, respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms, the maintenance of international peace and security, and the further promotion of friendly relations and cooperation among states in accordance with the UN Charter, as well as the United Nations space laws and principles that directly and indirectly affect civil society actors. The United Nations regimes was established in 1945 with the United Nations Charter, arguably creating our modern international legal and geopolitical framework composed currently of 193 member states and 2 non-member observer states. The Charter is a constitutive instrument of the UN, which sets forth the rights and obligation of member states and establishes the principal organs and procedures of the organization. The Principal Space Law Treaty, or the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, dictates the obligations of its states parties to carry on activities in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, in accordance with international law, including the Charter, thus highlighting the predominance of the UN Charter and its succeeding instruments in the expansion of space activities, including increasingly relevantly the role of civil society participation in those activities. The UN Charter is an international treaty to which UN member states are bound and is composed by 24 chapters, amongst which is Chapter 10 that established the UN Economic and Social Council, which, as mentioned earlier, grants special consultative status with the UN to civil society organizations. The UN has largely facilitated our current regime of international law, within which are provisions providing directly for the rights of individuals and communities, and therefore especially relevant to civil society, given its relationship vis-a-vis any given UN member state. The UN Economic and Social Council serves as the central forum with the UN for discussing international economics and social issues, and has a rotating membership of 54 member states. the Council facilitates the participation of civil society by making suitable arrangements for consultation with non-governmental organizations which are concerned with matters within its competence, thus providing an avenue for civil society organizations to raise their concerns, express their ideas, and exercise an influence on international matters, including the development of space law and policy at the UN level. There are several provisions structuring the work of the UN Economic and Social Council that civil society actors granted consultative status with the UN organ may keep in mind, namely that the United Nations Charter empowers the Council in various capacities, including to consider civil society input in making or initiating studies and reports with respect to international economic, social, cultural, educational, health, and related matters, or in making recommendations to with respect to any such matters to the UN General Assembly, UN member states, or specialized agencies concerned. The UN Charter also empowers the Council to consider civil society in calling international conferences on matters falling within its competence, as well as in preparing draft conventions for submission to the General Assembly with respect to matters also falling within its competence. Additionally, the Charter empowers the Council to consider civil society input in making recommendations for the purposes of promoting respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. So civil society actors seeking to partake in the development of space should consider, in a manner consistent with international law, the role human rights and fundamental freedoms provided for in the United Nations Charter may play in facilitating that participation. There should be consideration, even if aspirationally, of the UN Declaration of Human Rights that was adopted by the UN General Assembly in December 1948. In it, the UN reaffirms a determination to promote social progress and better standards of life, and reiterates the pledge UN member states made to achieve, in cooperation with the UN, the promotion of universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Although historically not interpreted in the context of space utilization and exploration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights assumes increased importance relating to the rights of individuals and communities in this field. Codified in the Declaration is that everyone has the right to freely participate in cultural life of the community and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. This provision can be interpreted to support the promises to civil society alluded to in the 1967 UN Outer Space Treaty in its reference to prospects to the common interests of all humankind in the progress of the exploration and use of outer space, and to the intention that the progress and use should be carried out for the benefit of all peoples. The Declaration provides also that everyone as a member of society is entitled to the realization through national effort and international cooperation of the economic, social, cultural rights indispensable for the free development of their personality, which unavoidably must be interpreted in light of factors on and also now beyond Earth. The Declaration also articulates that everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in the Declaration of Human Rights can be fully realized. In this respect, exercising the provisions of the UN Economic and Social Council provides a practical means for civil society organizations to participate in the development of space law and policy. The Declaration, however, also sets forth the principle of balancing rights and responsibilities and extends the notion of positive and negative obligations, or in terms used in current space law discussion, expresses the concept of due regard, so that the rights of some do not infringe on the rights of others, but however, that in no case can be exercised contrary to the purpose and the principles of the UN. In this respect, the Declaration of Human Rights affirms that everyone has the obligation and capacity to respect the rights of others, and that rights can be limited by law in part to achieve this end. Another instrument of international law that might call to the attention of civil society organizations seeking to increase their participation in space development is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in December 1966. Although adopted in the historical context of decolonization, its principles also assume a new importance under international law with the advancing exploration of use of outer space supported by civil actors. Consistent with the UN Charter, the Declaration on Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic and social cultural rights provides that all people have the right to self-determination, by virtue of which they can freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. It attests also that states parties to the covenant recognize the right of everyone to take part in cultural life and to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and applications, which now unavoidably include those deriving from the exploration and use of space. The covenant accedes, however, that the steps to be taken by the states parties to the covenant in order to achieve the realization of those rights include those necessary for the conservation, the development, and the diffusion of science and culture, which necessarily invoke the historical role of civil society. The International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights attests also to the promises by its states parties to undertake to respect the freedom indispensable for scientific research and creative activity, and to recognize the benefits to be derived from the encouragement and development of international contacts and cooperation in the scientific and cultural fields. In this sense, the opportunities afforded by the UN Economic and Social Council for civil society participation gain increased importance yet again, also by supporting synergies within the UN regime to advance creativity and skill sets among civil society, benefiting the further exploration and use of outer space. In December 1986, the UN General Assembly adopted the resolution on the Declaration on the Right to Development, in which it recognized that development is a comprehensive economic, social, cultural, and political process, which aims at the constant improvement of the well-being of the entire population and of all individuals on the basis of their active, free, and meaningful participation in the development and in the fair distribution of benefits resulting therefrom. The Declaration concedes that in order to promote development, and in the context of the development of space, which is the subject of these remarks, equal attention and urgent consideration should be given to the implementation, promotion, and protection of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. In recognizing that the creation of conditions favorable to the development of peoples and individuals is the primary responsibility of their states, the Declaration can be interpreted to thus emphasize the role of UN member states, which, however, can be prospectively balanced with the collaboration of a greater number of civil society organizations through the UN Economic and Social Council. With respect to the Declaration of the Right to Development, some further consideration can be given to its relative youthfulness in comparison to the earlier discussed instruments, thus potentially encouraging a greater emphasis on its principles, particularly given its temporal relation after and not before the initial actualization of space exploration evidenced in the 1960s and early 1970s. The following elaboration of rights codified in Declaration that could be considered by civil society or organizations in their efforts to become more participant in space development policies are the following. The Declaration states the right to development is an inalienable human right by virtue of which every human person and all peoples are entitled to participate in, contribute to, and enjoy. Further, it establishes that the human person is the central subject of development and should be the active participant and beneficiary of the right to development, as well as has a responsibility for development individually and collectively, including promoting and protecting an appropriate political, social, and economic order for development. These provisions can be interpreted to emphasize the civil and non-governmental participation in space development policies. The Declaration on the Right to Development dictates also that the realization of the right to development requires full respect of the principles of international law in accordance with the UN Charter. Thus, underscoring the states have the duty to encourage the observance and realization of human rights and to eliminate obstacles to development resulting from failure to observe civil and political rights, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights. Therefore, encouraging popular participation in all spheres as an important factor in development and in the full realization of human rights. The Declaration finally additionally states that steps should be taken to ensure the full exercise and progressive enhancement of the right to development, including the formulation, adoption, and implementation of policy, legislation, and other measures at the national and international level. Given this language, the leverage of civil society organizations is potentially augmented in light of the recent and increased efforts by the UN Economic and Social Council and other various UN offices to coordinate greater participation by these organizations in the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including in the initiation and throughout the duration of the implementation phase of achieving its 17 sustainability goals. In concluding my remarks, I would encourage the further research and analysis of how existing rights attributed to individuals and communities under international law can be interpreted and exercised by civil society organizations in order to increase participation in space development and elaboration of space law and policy, particularly as space exploration and utilization increasingly and more broadly influences the lives of those individuals and communities around the world. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Marlène. That was a most interesting talk. Let me see how much time we have for questions. We have time for one or two. So who wants to ask something to Marlène? Keith?
I would make a comment that and you might respond to this, that into effect because L5 Society, among others, opposed it. But in fact, the Moon Treaty provisions are absolutely in conflict with the UN Declaration of Human Rights. If you don't believe that, wrote a whole article on it called Star Laws, which you might read sometime.
Thank you for your comment. I will read the article.
The provisions are basically that from the Moon Treaty is that an organization can take back anybody who tries to escape from them in space, whereas the Declaration of the United Declaration of Human Rights says people can leave. It was just forbidden in the Moon Treaty, and that was, of course, one of the main reasons that the Society opposed it.
I'm sorry, your voice was a bit disturbed, Keith.
Oh, okay. The provisions in it is that the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights provides for the ability of anybody to leave one country and go to another one, to become a refugee, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that's forbidden in the Moon Treaty, in that the Moon Treaty provisions in there were that you could always be, a country could require your return, and the other country that had you at the moment would have to give you back. So there's a conflict there.
Well, I can appreciate your commentary, and I understand the provisions that you've highlighted. I think even though those are the provisions on its face, in order to implement those provisions, there'll probably be a series of legal discussion and legal stages, because there would need to be the incorporation of other international law.
It didn't work out that way for Simon Kadurkis. Mm-hmm. You should read it up sometime, because it was a rather disturbing situation. But anyway, it didn't go into effect because we opposed it. So that was the end of that.
But I will read the article. Thank you very much.
If you're looking for it, it's linked off of my Wikipedia page, if no place else.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much.
And we are going to leave the floor to Keith, who is our next speaker.
Am I next?
Okay. Yes, you're next. And okay. Well, you don't have to be shy in your self-introduction. So I will just mention that Keith is a co-founder of the legendary L5 Society, which is one of the precursors of most of the organizations represented here today. You have the floor. I just see that Martine is here and connecting to audio. No, now the system is that she's listening fine. As Marlène said, Keith, your voice doesn't come out that crisp? Perhaps it's an internet connection problem, or perhaps you're not close enough to the microphone or something like that.
Would it help if I was a little closer to the microphone here?
I don't know. Now I'm hearing you just fine.
Okay.
Earlier, your voice sounded broken at times. However,
Okay.
the floor,
Well,
this is yours. Make the best of it.
Okay. This is I'm out on the end of a pretty shaky connection, so I'm not surprised. Just my background on this, as you mentioned, was I founded L5 and was involved in a whole bunch of different technical kinds of things. And then a very unusual kind of thing. I wound up in being involved in a huge internet fight with the Church of Scientology. And I wrote a couple of articles as a result of that. One of them is Sex, Drugs, and Cults, where it describes essentially the human vulnerability to cults as being very similar to drugs, in that the heavy attention that cults provide to people has the effect of releasing dopamine and endorphins in the brain, which is exactly the same effects that you get from drug addiction. Anyway, can you fire up? I didn't bring it up. Can you bring up my slides? Maybe.
Yes,
if
sure.
not, I can give it a try.
Yes. So just one thing.
Any,
now I'm going to show the slides that Keith sent me. Thing is that in the recording you will see and hear him, but you'll see my face at the side. Okay. I hope that doesn't bother anyone. So you'll see me, but Keith Henson is speaking. Let me share.
That's fine.
Here we go. And don't forget, please, to tell me when you want the next view.
This is a 3,000-year-old mud brick construction. I should say that sort of as a precursor to this, I do not think much of trying to do anything on the moon. It is just too difficult to do anything there. If humans do a lot on the moon, I suspect it will be done with teleoperation. However, if you ever really have to be on the moon, one of the things you need is shielding. In fact, you need about 5 meters of regolith to keep you to keep the cosmic radiation down. And this is one way to get it. If you notice the stripies on this is, like I say, this is a 3,000-year-old construction job. And if you go to the next slide, it shows how the stuff is. There's another example of the thing. This is actually in a rock, and you can see how thick the structure is behind it there. And the next slide shows the details of actually using it. There you go. It's a way to construct a shelter space without needing any kind of form inside the thing. You just build up a wall, and then you start laying up this this particular arch. It's a catenary. It's an inverted catenary arch. And anyway, you can get by with pure compression on the thing. So it means that it doesn't. You don't need any forms inside the thing in order to do it. Anyway, like I say, I'm not a fan of being on the moon, but if you have to be if for some reason somebody comes up with a reason to be on the moon, this is an interesting way to make shelter space to keep you from both solar radiation kind of problems, so the solar mass ejections and such, and the problems involved with cosmic radiation, where you need quite a bit. Okay. Anyway, going on to something further, can you jump one more slide and see what I put in there? There's a company called Icon, which is really kind of an interesting thing. I've run into this several times recently. They have a $50-some-odd million NASA grant to process regolith, figure out how to process regolith, and I cannot manage to find any kind of a contact point for them. I've tried quite a bit, and it just doesn't work. And I've actually found that to be common nowadays among web pages. The people put up these web pages, and they've obviously put a lot of work into the artwork on the web pages, and there's no contact point on them. Very, very strange. You wonder why they did it. Advertising without any feedback mechanism to order any stuff on it. So it's very difficult to tell what they're doing. But this is one. I've got several people trying to figure out how to get some kind of contact with them. But even the NASA people that I know of that are into the ISRU stuff in University of Florida don't know how to get into contact with them at all. So interesting times. I don't know exactly what's involved here, but anyway. Next slide. Okay. The fundamental problem that you have in space is something called the rocket equation. And one way to look at the rocket equation is that the final mass divided by the initial mass is equal to 1 over e raised to a power that is depending on the mission velocity divided by the exhaust velocity, which means essentially you're dealing with the ratio on there for something where the mission velocity is like 9 kilometers per second, and the exhaust velocity is your maximum for chemical fuel, 4.5 on there. Means that that the ratio is 1 over e squared, which is about 13%, which means it's just no wonder that nobody has managed to build a viable single stage to orbit. Anyway, it turns out that you cannot get anything more than 4.5 kilometer per second exhaust velocity out of chemical fuels. That's just it. There's energy just isn't available on it, and that's the best you can do. However, that's not the limit. For example, the nuclear propulsion system NERVA ran to 8.25 kilometer per second. But they used a 1.2 gigawatt nuclear reactor and ran hydrogen over it. And it heated the hydrogen flaming hot, and that gave them the exhaust velocity they need. Well, you can also use lasers on it. And this is a slide from Philip Lubin's bunch at University of California at Santa Barbara, where they're talking about lasers as big as 100 gigawatts in order to do it. It turns out that if you're going to take something, next slide on it. I think that's the next one. Yeah, this is a concept. This is the vehicle involved here is a Skylon, and it's been modified here by these heaters built into the wings on it. And the lasers coming down from space are up to 12 gigawatts. Or sorry, 12 gigawatts. Because that's what you need if you're talking about 250 tons of vehicle, and you're trying to accelerate the thing at 1G. You need to run 250 kilograms of hydrogen per second through the thing, and heat it with 12 gigawatts of power in order to get the hydrogen hot enough to provide the exhaust velocity that you need. However, if you do that, you get the fraction that you get into orbit is roughly 1 over e, which is 1 over about 2.7. So this would allow a 300-ton vehicle to put about 1/3 of it, or around 100 tons, in orbit. And of that, maybe half of it is structural mass, and the rest of it is payload. So and actually, you can do a little better than that, because the ratio is a little better than 1 over e. And so you might put 60 tons in orbit. These things, the cost estimate on them, that if for very high amounts of material being lifted is about $100 a kilogram. So if you can use the same numbers on the thing and then put up 4 times as much, we're talking about all of a sudden the price has dropped to $25 a kilogram. Turns out the laser, as huge as the cost is, because it's about $100 billion worth of cost on the thing, when you spread the laser cost over the 5 years, for example, and a number of flights that you can fly out with this, it turns out it's about $8 or $9 per kilogram. So we've got a method here which would probably drop the price well under $50 a kilogram to get stuff into orbit with this particular method. Next slide, which shows the laser, which is actually in space. This was a very early conception on it, and we were thinking about sending the power up, but we would actually use a power satellite to run it probably nowadays. And the next slide, which is details on how you get rid of the waste heat, which is a real problem. This is a very early version of the thing, but what it amounts to is that you let steam, low pressure, low temperature steam into these plastic tubes that are sometimes a mile long or more, 2.5 kilometers or something like that. And what happens is that as the stuff condenses, you get this fog of water and steam in there, and you sort out the water and put the steam in the next tube over, and add more hot water to the thing and let it boil at low pressure, and that deals with the waste heat, because waste heat in lasers is a real big problem. You have to get the lasers are very seldom more than 50% efficient, which means that you've got an awful lot of waste heat to get rid of. I think that's the end of the slides. You can chop them if you want. Anyway, that's the if you're serious about a lot of things in space, big space mining, power satellites, for example, it turns out that a reasonable approach on power satellites takes 2.5 million tons per year of stuff lifted to orbit, which is to say it takes about 25,000 flights of a Skylon, or about twice that many with the Skylon, or sorry, there's twice that many, 25,000 flights with a Starship, and about twice that many using a Skylon on it. But the amount of stuff that you start off with in the runway is quite a bit smaller, because in this case the Skylon might put 1/6 of its takeoff mass in orbit, and a Starship puts 2%. It puts 100 tons, starting with 5,000 tons on the launch pad. So it's a consideration. And the other problem that you wind up with that nobody has yet worked out is can you really launch that many? I mean, can you launch that many Starships without damaging the ozone beyond reason? And I don't know. Some years ago, I talked to NOAA into running a study for the Skylon, which burns only hydrogen. And it turned out you could run 1 million flights a year on the Skylon without doing too much damage to the ozone. But I simply don't know what kind of damage you get from methane burners as opposed to burning hydrogen. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to chop it off there, and if there's any time left, I'll talk to people's questions, if anybody has any.
I'm going to have a couple of very technical questions for you, but since Frank is just back, I wasn't even sure that he would be able to make it because he had to go suddenly. I suggest that we give the floor to Frank first, And that will leave 15 minutes for global discussion.
Okay, well, you know, whatever, if anybody's, I realize I dumped a lot of stuff on people. And you really need to be, you know, things like rocket equation are not easy to grok. So, but if anybody's got any questions on it, I'll be more than glad to deal with that or any of the other kind of things.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's give the floor to Frank first, and then we continue the discussion. Frank, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. I just want to start off by acknowledging Keith, one of my heroes from the early days. And, you know, back in the day with Gerard K. O'Neill and all the pioneers, not so much pioneers in building rockets, but in thinking about human expansion into the solar ecosystem way back when it was very, very close to science fiction. So Keith, thanks for all you've done. And, you know, it's really wonderful.
You might get a kick out of this. You may know who Hoagland is, Richard Hoagland.
Yeah, I do.
Well, the society was, the L5 Society was originally incorporated as the High Frontier. And Hoagland managed to screw that name up so badly in Washington in the summer of 75. He went around, Hoagland is a very strange character. He went around and set up appointments for O'Neill to talk to various important people in Washington. And then he never told O'Neill.
Yeah, great plan, poor implementation.
Well, yeah, well, it turned out, of course, that the name was Mud after that. And we had to change it. And so I can remember calling O'Neill and saying, is it okay if we call it the L5 Society? And it turned out that was gold.
Yeah, that turned out to be a good.
O'Neill said, sure, no problem.
Hold on just a minute, everybody. I got to quiet down my dog. I'll be.
Lots of luck. There are some strange stories from those days, I'll tell you for sure.
You should write a book, perhaps, on this thing.
It would not be believable. Mostly.
It does go back to the whole idea that was floated earlier, you know, that individuals make decisions that have enormous implications, obviously, for the human future. And if any individual here thinks that you can't have an impact, you're wrong. You can. And that's not really my topic, so I won't get into that too deeply. But I do want to say thanks to Giulio for inviting me. And I am just delighted to be here on this auspicious anniversary of the Apollo 17, the last humans to walk on the moon. And Gene Cernan is a bit of a hero of mine because I interviewed him for my book, The Overview Effect, and he really said a lot of profound things.
Frank, I just realized that your representation is dated December 14, 2061, so that I hope you have good things from the future to tell us.
Well, Giulio, I'm glad you noticed that, but it's not 2061, it is 61, because I date everything from the moment that humans first experienced the overview effect.
That's a beautiful thing that you have said.
It is the overview effect era, year 61. But it could be 2061 as well. It could be the future. So thanks for noticing. All right, so I think by now the term overview effect is pretty familiar. But let me just say it is defined today, it's defined as a cognitive shift reported by astronauts and cosmonauts. And it changes their perspective on themselves, on our planet, and on the human future. It's also a deeply emotional experience, and more than one astronaut has told me that tears came to their eyes when they first saw the Earth from orbit or from the moon. So it's also emotional, and this is important because emotion moves people as much as cognition. We're in a new era now. We are in an era that I envisioned when I wrote the overview effect, which was a time when more people could experience the overview effect than a few selected astronauts, cosmonauts. And that's a really important aspect of it. Michèle Hanlon brought this up. And it really is the most important part of it, I think. I can talk all day about what the astronauts have said. They're all different. They're not robots. They experience it differently. And now, as we are entering a period of commercial space flight, we're going to get an even greater variety of experiences. Some of the common comments they make is, I knew there were no borders or boundaries on the Earth, but knowing it from a textbook is different from experiencing it. I knew the Earth was beautiful, but oh my goodness, it is so beautiful. There's a feeling of fragility of our planet, but I think it's really the fragility of our civilization, as Adriano pointed out. There's also this feeling we're all in this together, a feeling that came up, you know, in the first 2 weeks or so of the pandemic, a realization we're interconnected as part of a whole system called Earth. And Don Lynn said, you can't see the boundaries over which we fight wars. And in a very real way, the inhabitants of this Earth are stuck on a very beautiful, lovely little planet in an incredibly hostile space, and everybody is in the same boat. I want to just quickly play an astronaut experience. This all began when I went to Johnson Space Center in 2019. I went to Johnson Space Center in 2019, and I interviewed 10 astronauts. I'm sorry, folks, I have to step away for just a minute to attend to my wife. Maybe Keith could answer some of the questions. I'm so sorry, my wife's not well.
Don't worry, Frank, we will wait for you. Yeah, in fact, waiting for Frank to come back, there was one thing, Keith, that I wanted to ask you and others to comment, which is this announcement that we had yesterday for the US Department of Energy of this breakthrough of the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, where the scientists achieved energy break-even in nuclear fusion for the first time in history. And that, of course, has a lot of implications for space. What do you think of it, Keith?
On a practical level, it doesn't mean anything, I'm sorry to say. It's not a practical approach for dealing with energy at all. It would have to be upwards of 100-fold. I mean, in order to actually get power out of something like that, they'd have to be firing the thing several times a second. And it takes like 10 hours to charge it up and let it cool down and fire it again. So it's not practical at all as an energy source. unfortunately.
Yes, I understand that, and this is a very preliminary thing, and
very early.
Yeah, they themselves, I mean, at the very beginning of the announcement yesterday, they said that they acknowledged that to get from here to viably commercial nuclear fusion will take a decade and perhaps two. But, you know, now we do have a feasibility proof. Now, if you think of what mobile phones did 20 years ago and what mobile phones do now, you see that, you know, once a technology exists, the improvements in efficiency that can happen over the medium term are kind of spectacular. So don't you think we could have something equally spectacular unfold in nuclear fusion science over the next 10 to 15 years?
It's not likely. And the physics involved is a different kind of it's a totally different kind of class of thing from what happened with the advances of electronics or cell phones. It just, they don't map to one another, unfortunately. What's been more interesting to me in recent years is a field called evolutionary psychology, which goes about trying to understand what it is that motivates people, in particular, how do they motivate differently at various different times. And one of the things which, of course, came up in that is an explanation for wars. And that wars turn out to be something that humans have done forever, certainly clear back to the point where we left Africa and so forth. But why, kind of thing? And it turns out that it's genetically profitable to do wars, even though it's personally not profitable to do them. But from the genes viewpoint, you do. And it takes some very strange understanding of things and some understanding of the human, well-known and well-understood human tendency to take the women particularly the young women of a defeated tribe. If you run through the math that's behind that in terms of the genes that are involved, it turns out that when things get tight to where it looks like half the tribe is going to die from starvation, you're better off to take a shot at dealing with at defeating the tribe next door and taking their resources. Strangely enough, but it also turns out that there's good news about that, because unless you're in a situation of that sort, there's a very strong evolutionary reason not to go to war. So if you want to keep war turned off, all you really need to do is ensure a rising income per capita. Most of you are familiar, or at least historically, you know that the Irish Republican Army went out of business. Anybody know why? You have to blame it on the Irish women. Over a period of about 40 years, they reduced the birth rate from 4 or 5 kids down to replacement level. And at the point where that happened, the economy got ahead of the population, so the income per capita went up, and that switched off support for the IRA. Bizarre, but you know, it's one of the few things that we know happened. And another example is the United States has a lot of craziness in it nowadays. And if you go take a look at where the craziness is in the US, it's the places where the future looks pretty bleak to the people involved. So one of the things that a really big space project might do is reduce the cost of energy with power satellites. But it's a little dicey. In order to make that work, you've got to have this incredible space transportation rate at, you know, like I say, at a $250,000, 250,000 flights of a Starship per year, which is pretty spectacular. You could get some of the money back by charging charging admission for watching them go up every 20 minutes. So.
Yeah, I see that there are interesting things happening in the field of solar power satellites as well. I was reading yesterday about this new project for which the European Space Agency is trying to get money from the nations. That would be a demonstrator of the concept, and the Chinese are doing the same thing, and I believe the Russians are doing the same things as well.
By the way, if anybody's interested in that, there's a Google group called Power Satellite Economics, which has been running for several years now, and does cover progress that's being made in that field, and the various news reports that come through on it. So I stuck it together, and it's got 200 or 300 people, but it doesn't have a real high traffic rate on it, so it's not too bad. So.
It's interesting. Waiting for Frank to come back. If he comes back, can I ask others to counterbalance Keith's quite negative opinion of this nuclear fusion thing with some more positive remarks? Let's see if somebody wants to speak.
Well, maybe I can say something, since after all, I'm a nuclear engineer. And my thesis many years ago was supposed to be about fusion propulsion. I'm
Do you know Rod Hyde?
Yeah, well, yeah. So the point is that, as he said, this is very far away. This is an interesting milestone, is interesting, but of course we are very far away. 50 years ago, we were about 50 years from the fusion, from the operation of the fusion. We are 50 years down the stream, and we are probably at least 50 years away. But the road is there.
It makes a better propulsion system than it does an energy system.
Probably.
At least that's my opinion on it. And you don't actually have to make, you don't actually have to use laser ignition in order to get propulsion. You just have to make small H-bombs and toss them out the back.
Yes. In fact, at that time there was a gas core nuclear reactor in the 1968, 70s. This was
and the Dumbo.
Yes.
Which was an advanced version of NERVA.
Yes.
That got stuff even hotter. But
right.
Even at that, NERVA was plenty hot.
Yeah, but yeah, indeed. But the whole thing is also wrapped by security. I think nuclear, it's of course kind of red herrings for a lot of people. So as soon as you talk nuclear, red eyes starts to with some reason. So, so I'm sorry, Giulio, I cannot counteract. But he said probably the propulsion it might be in inverted comma easier for whatever it means than not the production of huge amount of energy. But,
that's right. But as I said, Christmas time is coming, and it's the time of the year where everyone is supposed to be more optimistic than usual. So let me make a best case scenario and submit it to you guys for criticism. Okay, so this is a very preliminary step, but is a step, so that over the next few years, there is more research and more funding in commercially viable nuclear fusion. And at some point, everyone realizes that it's going to happen. It's going to happen relatively soon, maybe in only 1 decade and all that. So once there is some agreement on the concept that fusion is the energy of the future, of course, everyone will start thinking of the environmental impact of energy production, and everyone, hold on one moment.
That's correct, by the way.
And everyone will realize that there is a special type of fusion that is the one catalyzed by helium-3 that could be entirely environmentally safe. And at that point, people will realize that since we don't have that on the Earth, we should go and get it and get it on the moon. And that could stimulate lunar operations in terms of both research and, what is more important, funding. And all that could happen in, say, 15 or 20 years. So that's my best case scenario. What do you guys think of it?
Helium-3 just doesn't make any sense.
Why not?
It's harder. The easiest one is deuterium and tritium. Deuterium is 3 orders of magnitude harder to do, and helium-3 is even harder. It's quite a bit harder on that. And then you have the fact that the stuff is in the lunar regolith at the rate of around 2 parts per billion, which means to get a ton of it, you're talking about having to process a billion tons of regolith. And it's not just that you have to scoop it up, you've got to put it in something and heat it hot enough to cause the helium-3 to be released. It would be a terrible industrial difficulty to do it.
Yes,
but
you're
right on fusion, but we've got one. It's called the sun. And it's just not that hard to collect sunlight and concentrate it if you want. It's not that difficult to do it. The mass on I've seen masses down as low as around 1 kilogram per kilowatt, but I don't believe them. Other people have worked on this at some detail, and they get around 6, but it doesn't matter. We can, at 6 kilograms and $200 a kilogram to lift it to geo, the cost of making electric power is under 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and without any real effort, it would get down to 2. So it's cheap. So why bother?
I'm all in favor of solar space power, but
yeah.
I think I'm not really fundamentalist married to one specific technology. To me, everything that helps achieve what we want to achieve is good. So I would insist on fusion as well. In fact, I was talking to a science fiction writer a few days ago. Name is Edward Lerner. He has written a great book called Déjà Doomed. It's like a thriller set on the moon. It's like 20 or 25 years. It is a very recommended book. I'll send you an email link. And in this science fiction scenario, they have all sorts of not very, but they do have technology significantly more advanced than today. For example, they 3D print everything on site, but they don't have nuclear fusion yet. And I asked Edward to come, why not? And he said essentially the same things that you were saying. So that I understand is a big challenge, and I understand it's going to be a long road. But the Christmas thing, let's be optimistic. I like to think that we will develop commercial viable fusion someday, perhaps not soon, but someday in 15 or 20 years.
If you really want to be optimistic, consider what nanotechnology would do to things. You could.
That we don't have a lab demonstration of that now.
That's true. On the other hand, every living object is an example of stuff that was built to nano specifications by genes. So it's difficult to imagine that there's some reason we can't build nanotechnology stuff. So
this is very true.
So anyway, that's the really optimistic view of it. On the other hand, nanotech and AI may be the end of the human race. So who knows?
Oh, don't say these bad things.
You got to be careful. I know some of the people who are careful on that, like Eliza Yudkowsky, and other people who deal with that, try to deal with getting friendly AI to exist, and it's not easy. It's very difficult and complex. You want to go down the stream a little bit, though. I suspect pretty strongly that the speed of light's the limit. You ever see that T-shirt? 186,000 miles per second. Not just a good idea, it's the law. Well, if it is, and I think it is, traveling interstellar is a pain in the neck. You can do it, but you have to use subjective warp drive to keep from being too bored by the whole process. Subjective warp drive is that you slow yourself down as you go across the galaxy. And warp 8, which means 10 to the -8 slower on it, allows you to cross the galaxy in a subjective 8 hours while you watch 1,000 supernovae twinkle. It takes you 100,000 years. And when you come back, you're kind of out of date, but you know, you can do it. So it will be interesting. I would love to see somebody do some science fiction on that, but you know, talk about characters that wouldn't be too easy to identify with. On the other hand, maybe they would be, because in order for these characters to talk to each other across vast stretches of time, they'd probably have to revert to where they were discussing, like Valley speak.
There is some science fiction about that, huh? But it's actually the reverse.
I haven't seen
Greg
any
Egan.
of that. I haven't seen any of that.
The novel called Shield's Ladder. You have kind of the reverse. The thing is that, you know, those who leave from one place for an interstellar trip are going to stay decades away. So that not themselves, but everyone on their home planet slows down, waiting for them. That's a nice idea. And now that I think of it, in another novel by Greg Egan, Diaspora, they don't slow down, but they modify their psychological outlook to enjoy the boredom of interstellar flight. That was also a nice one.
That's an interesting concept.
I'll send you the links. Let's not monopolize the discussion. Do others want to pitch in on fusion or nanotech or AI, science fiction, interstellar travel, any of that?
Go for it, Adriano.
So, Giulio, I had the impression you were asking for the opinion about the energy problem and possible...
About all the things that we have been discussing in the last few minutes.
Okay. So, I think, nuclear fusion is a beautiful thing, I think. Some consideration should be done to solve the energy problem in the closed Earth. It is late. We wait too much. We waited too much. Now, to step from the current initial stage to an industrial stage, it will require at least 10 years, they said, and it will be too much. But the most important thing is that, however, it should be developed, because it is also important as a propulsion mean and as a source not only for Earth but for the Moon and other locations in space. If we conceive fusion for Earth, that it will be a terrestrial solution that will not work. In the closed system, it will not be enough, and it will not work, and it will not be timely. But I want to say more. Even the space-based solar power, and I know that saying that I will pull many enemies to me. I think that even the space-based solar power beamed to Earth is a terrestrial solution. It doesn't think in the paradigm of expansion. It thinks about growing on Earth, and really we don't need to grow farther on Earth's surface. We need to start growing outside. So if we think developing our industries according to the Jeff Bezos plan in the geolunar system, then we have to start thinking that we need more energy in space. We also need energy on Earth for the web society and for the mobility and everything. But our main goal will be to generate energy in space. And in space, we have solar power for space, not for Earth, for space. And for sure, we have nuclear, not only fission, but also the old fission, not only fusion, but also the fission, as a Kraft-Erik wrote magistrally in his paper about the moon industrialization and so on. So my thought about energy problem is in a philosophical view about thinking outside Earth. Not when we will be in space, we will be looking at Earth, getting all the impressions that Frank was saying about the overview effect. But looking outside, we will see the opportunities. Yes, space is empty, space is big, space is scaring, but it is also an enormous field of opportunities. Energy, resources, asteroids, raw materials, and so on. So if we want to change, if we want to start to kicking off expansion, we have to think outside, start to thinking outside. It's a different perspective.
I've got an example of that. If you want to look at it, you can find it by going after asteroid mining and my name. You'll probably find it in Google. It's but what it's about is mining an asteroid, one called 1982 DA, and it's a couple of cubic kilometers of nickel iron, and it takes a 30 gigawatt power plant running an open-ended induction furnace as the front end to processing that much material. It takes 25 years to use the whole thing up. But why do you do it? It turns out that it would provide an amount of gold that's about a third of the current mining on the Earth, and it would provide about 5 times that much value in platinum. Big project. There's very little work that's been done on mechanisms for processing stuff in space, industrial kind of processes. People do not realize just how much knowledge has been developed in making things like aluminum on the Earth. It's a lot of work behind that, understanding how to do it. That's one of the things that bothers me about it, is there's been very little work on this.
Thinking about asteroid mining, we also have to consider that it's very much easier than mining on Earth, because the materials in asteroids are not compressed by gravity. So they are in a 90% pure state. You don't need to process very much to get iron, for instance, because it's there. It's a pure status, more or less. And so for the other metals, rare metals, and so on. So it will require a very much easier process to get metals from asteroids than Earth.
I don't know. I've spent a lot of time working in the mining business, and it's you can't use the same mechanisms in space that you on a solid metal asteroid that you can on stuff on the ground. Frank seems to have showed back up.
Hello, everybody. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. You want to continue?
I had to talk to my wife's doctor. It was kind of urgent. Giulio,
Thanks for coming back, Frank.
Like I have 9 minutes. I'll do my best to move through, and I'll skip my videos, which is unfortunate because they're good.
I think for your video, we can stay here a few minutes more.
Do you want me to do the videos?
How long is it?
3 minutes each. There's 2 of them.
Then do it, please.
All right, here we go. Yeah, so as I said, let me see here. I'm not going to worry about being full screen either. As I said, I was invited to Johnson Space Center in 2019. I interviewed 10 astronauts. That turned into a remarkable series called Down to Earth. It includes something like 21 short astronaut descriptions of the experience and a 30-minute documentary, which was nominated for an Emmy. We didn't win, but we felt pretty good about it. Here's just one of them. There's so many, it's hard to choose, but here's one.
Can you enlarge the view? Can you enlarge it?
On social media and pictures of NASA archives of the Earth so many times, I actually started to get worried. What if I get up there and it's just like the pictures? I mean, that's going to be weird.
I do not know if I can.
That's the thing where I'm like, oh, it looks just like the pictures. I'm ready to go home now. And then on the Soyuz, my launch vehicle launched with the Russians. And on my Soyuz, when I first got a chance to look out my little window, which is about right here at the Earth, there's something about looking out a round window at the curvature of the Earth that makes it just more pronounced and really makes it have a huge impact. I just had this feeling like I was way up high looking down and.
Try this.
At the curvature of the Earth, it makes it just more pronounced and really makes it have a huge impact. I just had this feeling like I was way up high looking down and we were over the ocean and the blues that I saw, it was ridiculous. I'd never imagined in my entire life getting to see something that beautiful. It was so foreign for the human mind to look at that, to see that total black of space, to see the Earth highlighted that way. And then I got to see a sunset. I had one piece of paper, it had a picture of my kids on it and a few of my flight data file burn times on it. But I just took a pencil and I drew like 15 curved lines and I just wrote light blue, darker blue, pink, purple, dark purple, all the way down to the surface of the Earth at sunset, because the scale of looking at a sun refracting through the atmosphere, it blew me away. And no picture captures that. There's no high enough dynamic range of a photo to capture what the human can see. So that first look outside completely sidelined me. I had a GoPro and I made a recording to my brother of no matter how much it costs in the future, come do this. You have to come do this. I mean, it's amazing. Over my 6 months in space, getting to look at the Earth every single day, it shows you something different. Every day it shows you that it's alive. It's a being just like we are. We're guests on this planet. And it's our mother, it's our father, it's our starship cruising around the sun in the middle of the solar system. There was never a moment that I looked out the window and didn't immediately grab a camera to take a picture of something that our planet was doing. It always surprised you. It's always magnificent. I'm a pilot, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a poet, but certainly when you're in low Earth orbit, looking down at the Earth, doesn't matter if you're a physicist, a school teacher, a stay-at-home parent, or maybe you just backpack for your whole life. If you look out, you're gonna have a magical experience in your own way, for certain.
So three main things about what he said. One is it's alive. Astronauts didn't use that terminology when I first started talking to them. Now they are seeing the Earth as a living system, not only as a system, but one that has, in a way, consciousness. And this changes how we think about it. Secondly, if more people had the experience, it would make a difference. That's part of a movement that I'm part of called bringing the overview effect down to Earth. But we also want to bring that out into the solar ecosystem, that consciousness, that awareness of the preciousness of these celestial bodies. I agree with Adriano. It's not just the Earth that's a planet. All these other celestial bodies deserve our respect as well. And, third, it's just that this is an important transformational thing that's going on right now. And we're at a turning point. We really, really are. And yet, I mean, I'm all about planning this venture. My organization, the Human Space Program, is all about a plan. But the first astronaut I ever interviewed, Joe Allen, said, with all the arguments pro and con for going to the moon, no one suggested that we should do it to look at the Earth. But that may, in fact, be the most important reason. Exploration brings unexpected results. That's another reason for us to leave this planet and go out there to other planets and other parts of the solar ecosystem. We don't even know what good things might come of it, but we do know it will change our consciousness. We will move out of I think Adriano called it a pre-Copernican mindset. I actually call it the Copernican insight, which is Copernicus was right. We're part of a solar system. We're not just part of one planet. We had an incredible opportunity, going back to this tribal discussion. We had an incredible opportunity under President Kennedy to make Apollo a joint mission of the Soviet Union and the United States, of even a multinational mission in which every country was involved. And Apollo 11 was inspiring, but it could have been more inspiring if President Kennedy's dream could have been realized. Apollo 8, Apollo 17, in my view, as an overview effector, those two had more impact because of Earthrise and the Blue Marble. What about Artemis? Man, they have some great pictures. I hope they will become iconic as well. And for all the back and forth about Artemis being late, over budget, et cetera, once again, it may well be the pictures and videos that justify it. Here's President Kennedy. Once again, one person, happened to be a person in power, can change the future. Our future in space could have been highly, even more collaborative than it is.
The spotlight is on the UN's glass and concrete headquarters in New York. To this great diplomatic arena comes the President of the United States to deliver a major policy address. Accompanied by Ambassador Adlai Stevenson, he is welcomed by Secretary General U Thant and Dr. Ralph Bunche. The present pause in the Cold War is hailed by the U.S. Chief Executive, who states that East and West must continue to seek agreement on measures which prevent war. Then this dramatic proposal.
Finally, in a field where the United States and the Soviet Union have a special capacity in the field of space, there is room for new cooperation, for further joint efforts in the regulation and exploration of space. I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon. Space offers no problems of sovereignty. By resolution of this assembly, the members of the United Nations have forsworn any claim to territorial rights in outer space or on celestial bodies, and declared that international law and the United Nations Charter will apply. Why, therefore, should man's first flight to the moon be a matter of national competition? Why should the United States and the Soviet Union, in preparing for such expeditions, become involved in immense duplications of research, construction, and expenditure?
So going back to Michèle's presentation, obviously the president read the Outer Space Treaty and he cared about it. and he took it seriously. But again, whatever proposals we have today that may seem completely outlandish, let's make them, because that could have happened and it would have changed history. One of the obvious things that came out when I was writing the overview effect was that space exploration changes human consciousness. And the further out we go, the more we will change. I call both of these pictures overview effect pictures, but it's very clear that the orbital view and the lunar view are different. The orbital view is seeing the Earth from space. The lunar view is seeing the Earth in space. It depends on which one you take, what dominates the picture, the Earth or the universe. And this will just continue as we move further out. And there will be shifts in awareness and thinking we can only imagine. One of the questions that has come up for me is why? Why is it that billions of years of evolution on Earth have created a spacefaring species? And when I decided to try to create a new space philosophy, it became clear that most justifications for space exploration are all about how it benefits humanity. Can we benefit the universe? That's the Cosmo hypothesis, that Homo sapiens, in becoming Homo spacians, has an ecological purpose in the universe. And our new prime directive should be give more to the universe, which I call Cosmo, than you take. We need an interactive, symbiotic relationship, and we can test that out in the solar ecosystem. Michèle and Adriano both talked about that. And it's all about how we do it. Just getting out there and treating the solar system like the old myth of the Wild West, that's not the way to do it. We need to see, we've finally learned that we need to be in that kind of relationship with the very first space community. The Earth is a space community because, as Adriano said, we are already in space. We can't be anywhere else. But we have to think about it symbiotically and cooperatively. I believe our next step is large-scale space migration. We need to move from mission to migration, from a multi-planet species, multi-species planet, to a multi-planet species. We need to reunite the environmental movement and the space movement. And we need to face the choice of overview or overshoot. In 1972, about the time we were ending Apollo, the Club of Rome commissioned a study called Limits to Growth eventually. It showed we were on the verge of overshooting the carrying capacity of the Earth. Well, guess what? We have done it. We have overshot it. We are living on borrowed time. We need to move from a terrestrial ecosystem to a solar ecosystem. We need to do it with overview awareness. And my organization, Human Space Program, we have a project called Making Space for the Environment. These two movements should not be separate. It's a tragedy that they are. Space exploration can benefit the Earth. Space migration can benefit the Earth far more. This all goes back to Jerry O'Neill. I'm not going to play this video, but if you want to know about Jerry, you really ought to watch The High Frontier, the untold story of Gerard K. O'Neill. He was inspired in part by this report, Limits to Growth. He saw the implications of the Earth as a closed system. That's when he began to think of space communities as an alternative. And he founded the Space Studies Institute, out of which grew L5 and many other things. Many of us are known as Jerry's kids. He had a vision of space migration to benefit the Earth 50 years ago, moving people and industry off the planet, making Earth sustainable again. It was that future that inspired the overview effect. It wasn't originally about astronauts. It was about space people who would always see the Earth in the sky. They would just know the Earth is an interconnected system, a living system, a part of the solar ecosystem. I want to leave you with the thought that what we must do is flip the script. Today, language is so important. Space exploration is seen as abandoning the Earth. Space migration is seen as leaving the planet in order to create a sort of gated community for the wealthy. We have to show it's a way to restore the Earth. What if large-scale space migration was the ethical choice, and staying on the Earth had to be justified by those who advocate not going outward? Next time somebody asks you, why do you want to go explore outer space when there's so many problems on Earth? I suggest you say, why are you staying on the Earth when you could help her by becoming a member of the large-scale space migration movement? We have to flip that script. That's the role of the nonprofit I started, the Human Space Program. I won't spend a lot of time on it. It grew out of my writing my book. And our goal is to create a blueprint for sustainable, inclusive, and ethical large-scale space migration. So in conclusion, sorry, I've gone over time, but we've achieved an overview of our planet, but that doesn't have to be our only planet. We're taking the next step, and everybody on Earth can, and I hope will, join this great adventure. It doesn't mean you have to be one of the migrants, but you could support it and you could see the value of it. And we have a lot of critical choices ahead of us. And the biggest one is, are we really going to stay home, or are we going to make a new home in the universe? In short, are we going to become citizens of the universe? I think it was pointed out earlier how important choice is. And, you know, human history, actually history of the universe, is the sum of many individual choices. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I hope maybe I've given you some ideas that you can share with those who don't automatically agree with our view. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you very much, Frank.
Yeah.
This was a really inspiring talk, really inspiring. I understand that it was not the best time for you to give this talk, and I hope we give, I'm sure I speak for everyone, give our best wishes to your wife, and we hope she recovers soon.
Thank you, and I will just say, I could tell you so much about how much Donna has contributed to our movement, but one thing I will tell you is that 28 years ago, when we were deciding to get married, I said, I only have one prenuptial agreement. And she knew I was broke, so she knew it wasn't about money. I said, if I get a chance to leave the planet and go on a space mission, you won't stand in my way. And she chuckled, said, don't worry, honey, that's fine. She didn't think it was going to become possible in my lifetime, but now she's a little nervous.
Our best wishes to her.
Thank you.
I believe Giuseppe wants to say something.
Yeah, well, I'd like to, of course, thank Frank for the inspiring speech. I have a practical question, being a practical person. We have tried to operationalize the overview effect with the camera. So I would like to hear from the author of the overview effect, if this makes sense according to him, or is it totally nonsense? Thank you.
Well, I think any effort to operationalize the overview effect and share it, and I think you're talking about the Moon Village Association has this in mind.
Yes.
I totally support it. I believe everything we do to share the overview effect is valid. I'm working with people who are doing virtual reality work on it, and I'm working with people who are bringing it into the psychotherapeutic world. And I'm definitely in support of commercial spaceflight. And, you know, one thing I have found is people get it and understand the overview effect in different ways. And even though there is nothing like the actual experience of being on the moon or being in orbit, there's just nothing like it. People get bits and pieces of it by videos, and they get it by books, and they get it in different ways. So I'm totally behind what you're doing, and I think it's a great idea. And again, originally I was thinking of O'Neill's vision of people living on the moon or in space communities, and they would just see the Earth in the sky all the time, and that would be the overview effect. There were no such people, which is why I started talking to astronauts.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's great.
I think we are already 15 minutes past time, so I'm going to stop the recording now. And before stopping, I want to thank everyone for attending this December 2022 edition of the Terasem Colloquium, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you very much, Giulio.
Thank you.